swirling up in waves and settling down.
Battery low. Battery 10%.
Aaron was more than grateful. The Ashaman's methods had been brutal, destroying flesh and ground with equal impartiality. Too many Shido had died to bury in less than days, even had anyone cared to bury them. So the vultures gorged, and the ravens, and the crows. The dead wolves were down there too. He had wanted to bury them, but that was not the wolves' way. 3 Aes Sedai corpses had been found, their channeling unable to save them from spears and arrows in the madness of battle, and half a dozen dead warders too. They were buried in the clearing near the wells. The birds were not alone with the dead, far from it. Black-feathered waves rose around Lord Dobraine Taborwin, and over 200 of his mounted Carianan armsmen, and Lieutenant Javier Nurella, with all that remained of his Mayenners, aside from the guards and the warders. Khan, with 2 white diamonds on blue, picked out the Carianan officers, all but Dobraine himself, and the Mayenners' red armor and red-streamered lances made a brave show amid the carnage. But Dobraine was not the only one who held a cloth to his nose. Here and there a man leaned from the saddle, trying to empty his stomach already emptied earlier. Mazrim Taim, almost as tall as Rand, was afoot in his black coat, with the blue and gold dragons climbing the sleeves, and maybe 100 more of the Ashaman. Some of them heaved up their bellies, too. There were maidens by the score, more Siswayaman than Carianan and Mayenners and Ashaman combined, and several dozen wise ones to boot. All supposedly in case the Shido returned, or perhaps in case some of the dead were only shamming, though Perrin thought anyone who pretended at being a corpse here would soon go insane. All centered around Rand. Perrin should have been down there with the Two Rivers men. Rand had asked for them, spoken about trusting men from home, but Perrin had made no promises. He'll have to settle for me, and late, he thought. In a little bit, when he managed to steel himself to the butcher's yard below. Only butcher knives did not mow down people, and they were tidier than axes, tidier than vultures. The black-coated Ashaman faded into the sea of birds, death swallowed by death, and ravens and crows surging up hid the others. But Rand stood out in the tattered white shirt he had been wearing when rescue came. Though perhaps he hardly needed deliverance by that time. The sight of Min, close beside Rand in pale red coat and snug breeches, made Perrin grimace. That was no place for her, or anyone. But she stayed closer to Rand since the rescue than even Taim did. Somehow Rand had managed to free both himself and her well before Perrin broke through, or even the Ashaman, and Perrin suspected she saw Rand's presence as the only real safety. Sometimes, as he rode across that charnel ground, Rand patted Min's arm or bent his head as if speaking to her, but not with his main attention. Dark clouds of birds billowed around them, the smaller darting away to feed elsewhere, the vultures giving ground reluctantly, some refusing to take wing, extending featherless necks and squawking defiantly as they waddled back. Now and then Rand stopped, bending over a corpse. Sometimes fire darted from his hands to strike down vultures that did not give way. Every time, Nandera, who led the maidens, or Suilin, her second, argued with him. Sometimes wise ones did too, from the way they tugged at the body's coat as if demonstrating something. And Rand would nod and move on. Not without backward glances, though, and only until another body caught his attention. "What is he doing?" demanded a haughty voice at Perrin's knee. By scent, he knew her before he looked down. Statuesque and elegant in a green silk riding dress and thin linen dust cloak, Karuna Nachaman was sister to King Paitar of Arafel, and a powerful noble in her own right, and becoming Aes Sedai had done nothing to dampen her manner. Trapped in what he was watching, he had not heard her approach. "Why is he down in that? He should not be." Not all the Aes Sedai in the camp were prisoners, though those who were not had been keeping out of sight since yesterday, talking among themselves, Perrin suspected, and trying to figure out what had happened at the last. Maybe trying to figure out some way around it. Now they were out in force. Vera Harkin, another Green, stood at Karuna's shoulder, a farm wife by looks despite her ageless face and fine woolen dress, but every scrap as proud as Karuna in her own way. This farm wife would tell a king to scrape his boots before coming into her house and be sharp about it. She and Karuna together led the sisters who had come to demise Wells with Perrin, or perhaps passed leadership back and forth between them. It was not exactly clear, which was hardly unusual with Aes Sedai. The other 7 stood in a covey not far away, or maybe in a pride. Lionesses, not quail by their air of being in charge. Their warders were arrayed behind them, and if the sisters were all outward serenity, the warders made no bones of their feelings. They were disparate men, some in those color-shifting cloaks that seemed to make parts of them disappear, but whether short or tall, thick or thin, just standing there, they looked like violence on a frayed leash.
Hey, Fire, how you doing?
Perrin knew 2 of those women well, Varen Mathwin and Alana Mosvani. Short and stout and almost motherly at times in a distracted way, when she was not studying you like a bird studying a worm, Varen was brown Aja. Alana, slim and darkly pretty, though a little haggard around the eyes of late for some reason, was green. Altogether, 5 of the 9 were Green. Once, some time ago, Varen had told him not to trust Alana too far, and he more than took her at her word. Nor did he trust any of the others, including Varen. Neither did Rand, for all they had fought on his side yesterday, and despite what had happened at the end, which Perrin still was not sure he believed, even though he had seen it. A good dozen Ashaman lounged by a wagon about 20 paces from the sisters. A cocky fellow named Charles Gedwin had charge of them this morning, a hard-faced man who swaggered standing still. All wore a pin in the shape of a silver sword on their tall coat collars, and 4 or 5 besides Gedwin had a dragon in gold and red enamel fastened on the other side. Perrin supposed that had to do with rank in some way. He had seen both on some of the other Ashaman. Not precisely guards, they managed to be wherever Karuna and the others were, just taking their ease and keeping a sharp eye open. Not that the Aes Sedai took any notice.
Hell yeah,
Not that you could
Fire.
see.
Can't beat that.
Even so, the sisters smelled wary and puzzled and infuriated. Part of that had to be because of the Ashaman. Well, Karuna's dark eyes flashed impatience. He doubted that many people kept her waiting. I don't know, he lied, patting Stepper's neck again. Rand doesn't tell me everything. He understood a little, he thought he did, but he had no intention of telling anyone. That was Rand's to reveal, if he chose. Every body that Rand looked at belonged to a maiden. Perrin was convinced of it. A Shido maiden without a doubt, but he was not sure how much difference that made to Rand. Last night he had walked away from the wagons to be by himself, and as the sound of men laughing, because they were alive, faded behind him, he found Rand. The dragon reborn who made the world tremble, sitting on the ground, alone in the dark, his arms wrapped around himself, rocking back and forth. To Perrin's eyes, the moon was nearly as good as the sun, but right then he wished for pitch blackness. Rand's face was drawn and twisted, the face of a man who wanted to scream, or maybe weep, and was fighting it down with every scrap of his fiber. Whatever trick the Aes Sedai knew to keep the heat from touching them, Rand and the Ashaman knew too, but he was not using it now. The night's heat would have done for a more than warm summer day, and sweat slid down Rand's cheeks as much as Perrin's. He did not look around, though Perrin's boots rustled loudly in the dead grass. Yet he spoke hoarsely, still rocking. 151, Perrin. 151 maidens died today. For me. I promised them, you see. Don't argue with me. Shut up. Go away. Despite his sweat, Rand shivered. Not you, Perrin. Not you. I have to keep my promises, you see. Have to, no matter how it hurts. But I have to keep my promise to myself, too, no matter how it hurts. Perrin tried not to think about the fate of men who could channel. The lucky ones died before they went mad. The unlucky died after. Whether Rand was lucky or unlucky, everything rested on him. Everything. Rand, I don't know what to say, but... Rand seemed not to hear. Back and forth he rocked, back and forth. Isan, of the Jara Sept of the Charinayil. She died for me today. Juanda of the Spine Ridge Miagoma. She died for me today. Ajarin of the Shilan Daraim. There had been nothing for it but to settle on his heels and listen to Rand recite all 151 names in a voice like pain stretched to breaking. Listen and hope Rand was holding on to sanity. Whether or not Rand was still completely sane, though, if a maiden who came to fight for him had been missed down there somehow, Perrin was sure that not only would she be buried decently with the others on the ridge, there would be 152 names in that list. And that was none of Karuna's business. Not that, or Perrin's doubts. Rand had to stay sane, or sane enough anyway. And that was that. Light sent it so. And the light burned me for thinking it so coldly, Perrin thought. From the corner of his eye, he saw her full mouth tighten momentarily. She liked not knowing everything about as well as being made to wait. She would have been beautiful in a grand sort of manner, except that hers was a face used to getting what it wanted. Not petulant, just absolutely certain that whatever she wanted was right and proper and must be. With so many crows and ravens in one place, there are certainly hundreds, perhaps thousands, ready to report what they've seen to a murdral. She made no effort to mask her irritation. She sounded as though he had brought every bird there himself. In the borderlands, we kill them on sight. You have men, and they have bows. It was true. A raven or crow was all too likely to be a spy for the Shadow, but disgust welled up in him. Disgust and weariness. To what point? With that many birds, the Two Rivers men and the Aiel could shoot every arrow they had, and spies would still be killed. Most times, there was no way to tell whether the bird you killed was the spy or the one that flew away. Hasn't there been enough killing? There will be more soon enough. Light woman, even the Ashaman are sated. Eyebrows rose among the onlooking clutch of sisters. No one spoke to Aes Sedai that way. Not a king or a queen.
Then after this, I got
Sarah gave him a look that said she was considering hauling him out of the saddle and boxing his ears. Still peering toward the shambles below, Karuna smoothed her skirts, her face coldly determined. Loyal's ears trembled. He had a deep but uneasy respect for Aes Sedai. Close to twice as tall as most of the sisters, sometimes he behaved as though one might step on him without noticing if he got in her way. Perrin gave Karuna no chance to speak. Give an Aes Sedai a finger, and she took your whole arm. Unless she decided to take more. You've been staying clear of me, but I have a few things to say to you. You disobeyed orders yesterday. If you want to call it changing the plan, he pushed on when she opened her mouth, then call it that. If you think that makes it better. She and the other 8 had been told to stay with the Wise Ones, well back from the actual fighting, guarded by the Two Rivers men and the Mayenners. Instead, they had plunged right into the thick of it, wading in where men were trying to cut one another into dog meat with swords and spears. You took Javi and Narella with you, and half the Mayenners died for it. You don't go your own way with no regard anymore. I won't see men die because you suddenly think you see a better way, and the Dark Ones take what everyone else thinks. Do you understand me? Are you finished, farm boy? Karuna's voice was dangerously calm. The face she turned up to him might have been carved from some dark ice, and she reeked of affront. Standing on the ground, she somehow made it seem that she was looking down at him, Not an Aes Sedai trick, that. He had seen Fail do it. He suspected most women knew how. I will tell you something, though the meanest intelligence should be able to reason it out. By the Three Oaths, no sister may use the One Power as a weapon except against shadow spawn, or in defense of her life, or that of her warders, or another sister. We could have stood where you would have had us, and watched until Tarman Gaten without ever being able to do anything effective. Not until we were in danger ourselves. I do not like having to explain my actions, farm boy. Do not make me do it again. Do you understand? Loyal's ears wilted, and he stared straight ahead so hard that it was plain he wished he were anywhere but here, even with his mother, who wanted to marry him off. Aram's mouth hung open, and he always tried to pretend Aes Sedai did not impress him at all. Jondon and Todd climbed down from their wagon wheel just a touch too casually. Jondon managed to stroll away, but Todd ran, looking back over his shoulder. Her explanation sounded reasonable. It was probably the truth. No, by another of the Three Oaths, it was the truth. There were loopholes, though, like not speaking the whole truth, or talking around it. The sisters might well have put themselves in danger so they could use the power as a weapon, but Perrin would eat his boots if they had not also been thinking they could reach Rand before anybody else. What would have happened then was anyone's guess, but he was certain their plans had not included anything like what actually happened.
He's coming,
Loyal said suddenly.
Look, Rand is coming.
Dropping to a whisper, he added,
Be careful, Perrin.
For an Ogier, it truly was a whisper. Aram and Karuna probably heard quite clearly, and maybe Bera, but certainly no one besides.
They did not swear anything to you.
His voice went back to its normal boom.
Do you think he might talk to me about what went on inside the camp? For my book?
He was writing a book about the Dragon Reborn, or at least taking notes for one.
I really didn't see much once the fighting began.
He had been at Perrin's side in the thick of it, wielding an axe with a haft nearly as long as he was tall. It was hard to take note of much else when you were trying to stay alive. If you listened to Loyal, you would think he was always somewhere else when things became dangerous.
Do you think he might, Karuna Sedai?
Karuna and Vera exchanged looks, then without a word glided across the ground to Varen and the others. Peering after him, Loyal heaved a sigh, a wind through caverns.
You really should have a care, Perrin, he breathed. You're always so hasty with your time.
He sounded like a bumblebee the size of a cat instead of a mastiff. Perrin thought he might learn to whisper again if they spent enough time around Aes Sedai. He motioned the ogre to be quiet, though, so he could listen. The sisters began talking right away, but not a sound reached Perrin's ears. Clearly, they had erected a barrier with the One Power. Clear to the Ashaman as well. They went from lounging to up on their toes in a heartbeat. Every line of them focused on the sisters. Nothing said they had taken hold of Saidin, the male half of the true source. Perrin would have wagered Stepper they had. By Gedwin's angry sneer, he was ready to use it, too. Whatever obstruction the Aes Sedai had raised, they must have dropped it. They folded their hands, turning to look down the slope in silence. Glances passed among the Ashaman, and finally Gedwin waved them back to apparent indolence. He looked disappointed. Growling irritably, Perrin turned back to look beyond the wagons. Rand was strolling up the slope with Min on his arm, patting her hand and talking with her. Once he threw back his head and laughed, and she ducked hers to do the same, brushing back dark ringlets that hung to her shoulders. You might have thought him a countryman out with his girl, except that he had belted on his sword, and sometimes he ran his hand down the long hilt. And except for Taim right at his other shoulder, and the wise ones following almost as close behind, and the rings of maidens and Siswayaman, Karienin, and Mayenners that completed the procession. What a relief that he would not have to ride down into that shambles after all. But he needed to warn Rand about all the tangled enmities he had seen this morning. What would he do if Rand did not listen? Rand had changed since leaving the Two Rivers, most of all since being kidnapped by
That
Corbin
was a
and
rough one.
whatnot. No,
We have still got
he had to be
about
sane.
that much left.
When Rand and Min entered the wagon circle, most of the procession remained outside, though they hardly came alone, but with quite an assembly in its own right. Taim shadowed Rand, of course, dark and slightly hook-nosed, and what parents supposed most women would consider good-looking. A number of the maidens had certainly given him
It
second
was a
looks, and third.
Regular
They were
size
forward
one.
about that sort of thing. As Taim stepped inside, he glanced to Gedwin, who shook his head just a hair. A grimace flashed across Taim's face, gone as soon as it appeared. Nandera and Sulin were right at Rand's heels, equally, of course, and Perrin wondered they did not bring 20 more maidens. They hardly seemed to let Rand bathe without maidens guarding the tub, that Perrin could see. He did not understand why Rand put up with it. Each had her shufa draped around her shoulders, bearing short hair cut with a tail at the back. Nandera was a sinewy woman, hair more gray than yellow, but her tough features managed to be handsome, if not beautiful. Sulin, wiry, scarred, leathery, and white-haired, made Nandera look pretty and almost soft. They glanced at the Ashaman, too, without exactly seeming to, then scanned both groups of Aes Sedai just as circumspectly. Nandera's fingers flashed maiden hand talk. Not for the first time, Perrin wished he could understand it, but a maiden would give up the spear to marry a toad before teaching their hand talk to a man. A maiden Perrin had not noticed, sitting on her heels against a wagon a few paces from Gedwin, answered the same way, and so did another, who until that moment had been playing at cat's cradle with the spear sister near the prisoners. Amis brought the wise ones in and took them aside to confer with Sorlia and a few of the others who had stayed inside the wagons. Despite a face too young for her waist-long white hair, Amis was an important woman, second among the wise ones to Sorlia. They used no one-power tricks to shield their talk, but 7 or 8 maidens immediately encircled them and began singing softly to themselves. Some sat, some stood, some squatted on their heels, each by herself, and all happenstance. If you were a fool. It seemed to Perrin that he sighed a great deal since he became mixed up with Aes Sedai and wise ones. Maidens, too. Women in general just seemed to give him fits of late. Dobrain and Avian, leading their horses and minus their soldiers, brought up the rear. Avian had finally seen a battle. Perrin wondered whether he would be so eager to see the next. About the same age as Perrin, he did not look as young today as the day before yesterday. Dobrain, with the front of his long, mostly gray hair shaved in the style of Carianan soldiers, definitely was not young. And yesterday, definitely, had not been his first battle, yet the truth was he looked older too, and worried. So did Avian. Their eyes sought out Perrin. Another time, he would have waited to see what they wanted to talk about, but now he slipped from his saddle, tossed Stepper's reins to Aram, and went to Rand. Others were there ahead of him. Only Sulin and Nandera held their silence. Karuna and Bera had moved the moment Rand stepped inside the wagons, and as Perrin approached, Karuna was saying grandly to Rand, "You refused healing yesterday, but anyone can see you are still in pain, even if Alana was not ready to leap out of her—" She cut off as Bera touched her arm, but she picked up again, almost without pause. "Perhaps you are ready to be healed now?" That had the sound of, "Perhaps you have come to your full senses?" "The matter of the Aes Sedai must be settled without any more delay, Karakan," Amis said formally, right atop Karuna. "They should be given into our care, Randall Thor," Sorlia added at the same time that Taim spoke. "The Aes Sedai problem does need to be settled, my Lord Dragon. My Ashaman know how to handle them. They can be held at the Black Tower easily." Dark, slightly tilted eyes flickered toward Karuna and Bera, and Perrin realized with a shock that Taim meant all the Aes Sedai, not just those who were prisoners now. For that matter, though Amis and Sorlia frowned at Taim, the looks they directed at the two Aes Sedai meant the same. Karuna smiled at Taim, at the wise ones, a thin smile to fit her lips. It was maybe a fraction harder when directed at the man in the black coat, but she seemed not to realize his intent yet. It was enough that he was who he was, what he was. Under the circumstances, she said coolly, I am certain that Koirin Sedai and the others will give me their parole. You have no more need to worry. The others spoke all at once. These women have no honor, Amis said contemptuously, and this time it was clear she included all of them. How could their parole mean anything? They are Datsang, Sorlia said in a grim voice, as though pronouncing sentence. And Baron frowned at her. Theron thought there was something in the old tongue. Again, the word seemed almost something he should recognize. But he did not know why it should make the Aes Sedai scowl, or why Sulan should suddenly nod agreement with the Wise One, who went on like a boulder rumbling downhill. They deserved no better than any other.
My Lord Dragon,
Taim said, as if belaboring the obvious.
Surely you want the Aes Sedai, all of them, in charge of those you trust. Those you know can deal with them, and who better? Enough!
Rand shouted. They fell silent as one, but their reactions were very different. Taim's features went blank, though he smelled of fury. Amis and Sorlia exchanged glances and adjusted their shawls in near unison. Their scents were identical too, and matched their faces in pure determination. They wanted what they wanted, and intended to have it, Karakan or no. Looks passed between Karuna and Bera as well, speaking such volumes that Perrin wished he could read them the way his nose read scent. His eyes saw two serene Aes Sedai in command of themselves, and anything else they wished to be in command of. His nose smelled two women who were anxious and more than a little afraid. Of Taim, he was sure. They still seemed to think they could deal with Rand one way or another, and with the Wise Ones. But Taim and the Ashaman put the fear of the light into them. Min tugged at Rand's shirt sleeve. She had been studying everybody at once, and the scent of her was almost as worried as the sisters. He patted her hand while glaring hard at everyone else, including Perrin when he opened his mouth. Everybody in the camp was watching, from the Two Rivers men to the Aes Sedai prisoners, though only a few Aiel stood close enough to hear anything. People might watch Rand, but they tended to stay clear of him too, if they could. The Wise Ones will take charge of the prisoners, Rand said at last, and Sorlia suddenly smelled so satisfied that Perrin knuckled his nose vigorously. Taim shook his head in exasperation, but Rand rounded on him before he could speak. He tucked a thumb behind the buckle of his sword belt, a dragon etched and gilded, and his knuckles were white from gripping it. His other hand worked on the dark boar hide of his sword hilt. The Ashaman are supposed to train and recruit, not stand guard, especially on Aes Sedai. Perrin's hackles stirred as he realized what aroma wafted from Rand when he looked at Taim. Hatred touched with fear. Light, he had to be sane. Taim gave a short, reluctant nod. As you command, my Lord Dragon. Min glanced uneasily at the black-coated man and moved closer to Rand. Karuna smelled of relief, but with one last glance at Bera, she drew herself up in stubborn certainty. These Aiel women are quite worthy. Some might have done well had they come to the tower, but you cannot simply hand Aes Sedai over to them. It is unthinkable. Bera Sedai and I will... Rand raised a hand, and her words stopped in their tracks. Maybe it was his stare, like blue-gray stone. Or maybe it was what showed clearly through his torn sleeve, one of the red and gold dragons that wound around his forearms. The dragon glittered in the sunlight. Did you swear fealty to me? Karuna's eyes popped as though something had struck her in the pit of her stomach. After a moment, she nodded, however unwillingly. She looked as disbelieving now as she had the day before, when she knelt down there by the wells at battle's end and swore beneath the light and by her hope of salvation and rebirth to obey the dragon reborn and serve him until the last battle had come and gone. Aaron understood her shock. Even without the 3 oaths, had she denied it, he would have doubted his own memories. 9 Aes Sedai, on their knees, faces aghast at the words coming out of their mouths, reeking of disbelief. Right now, Bera's mouth was puckered up as though she had bitten a bad plum. An Aielman joined the small group, a tall man about the same height as Rand, with a weathered face and touches of gray in his dark red hair, who nodded to Perrin and touched Amisa's hand lightly. She might have pressed his hand for a moment in return. Ruark was her husband, but that was about as much affection as Aiel displayed in front of others. He was also clan chief of the Tardar Aiel. He and Gaul were the only 2 men who did not wear the Siswaimon headband. And since last night, he and 1,000 spears had been out scouting in force.
Damn, they need to charge this.
A blind man in another country could have sensed the temper around Rand, and Ruark was no fool. Is this the right moment, Randolthor? When Rand motioned him to speak, he went on. The Shido dogs are still fleeing east as fast as they can. I saw men with green coats on horses to the north, but they avoided us. And you said to let them go unless they gave trouble. I think they are hunting any Aes Sedai who escaped. There were several women with them. Cold blue eyes glanced at the 2 Aes Sedai, Anvil flat and Anvil hard. Once, Ruark had walked lightly around Aes Sedai. Any Aiel had. But that had ended yesterday, if not before. Good news. I'd give almost anything to have Galena, but still, good news. Rand touched the hilt of his sword again, eased the blade in its dark scabbard. The action seemed unconscious. Galena, a Red, had been in charge of the sisters who held him prisoner. And if he was calm about her today, yesterday he had been in a fury that she had gotten away. Even now his calm was icy, the sort that could hide smoldering rage, and his scent made Perrin's skin crawl. They are going to pay. Every one of them. There was nothing to say whether Rand meant the Shido or the Aes Sedai who had escaped, or both. Bera moved her head uneasily, and he turned his attention back to her and Karuna. You swore fealty, and I trust that. He held up his hand, thumb and forefinger nearly touching to show how far. Aes Sedai always know better than anybody else, or so they think. So I trust you to do what I say. But you won't so much as take a bath without my permission, or a wise one's. This time it was Bera who looked as though she had been struck. Her light brown eyes swiveled to Amis and Soralia with astonished indignation, and Karuna quivered with the effort of not doing the same. The 2 wise ones merely shifted their shawls, but once again their aromas were identical. Contentment rolled off them in waves, a very grim contentment. Perrin thought it a good thing the Aes Sedai did not have his nose, or they would have been ready to go to war right then and there. Or maybe run, and dignity be hanged. That was what he would have done. Ruark stood there idly examining the point of one of his short spears. This was Wise One's business, and he always said he did not care what the Wise Ones did, so long as they kept their fingers out of Clan Chief's business. But Taim, he made a show of not caring, folding his arms and looking around the camp with a bored expression. Yet his scent was strange, complex. Perrin would have said the man was amused, definitely in a better humor than before. The oath we took, Bera said at last, planting her hands on her ample hips, is sufficient to hold anyone but a dark friend. The twist she gave to oath was almost as bleak as the one she gave dark friend. No, they did not like what they had sworn to. Do you dare to accuse us? If I thought that, Rand snapped, you would be on your way to the Black Tower with Taim. You swore to obey. Well, obey! For a long moment, Vera hesitated, then in an instant was as regal from head to toe as any Aes Sedai could be, which was saying something. An Aes Sedai can make a queen on her throne look a slattern. She curtsied slightly, stiffly inclining her head a fraction. Karuna, on the other hand, made a visible effort to take hold of herself, the calm she assumed hard and brittle as her voice. Must we then request permission of these worthy Aiel women to ask whether you are willing to be healed yet? I know Galena treated you harshly. I know you are welts from shoulders to knees. Accept healing, please. Even please sounded part of an order. Min stirred at Rand's side. You should be grateful for it as I was, sheepherder. You don't like hurting. Somebody has to do it, or else. She grinned mischievously, very nearly the Min Perrin remembered from before she was kidnapped. Or else you won't be able to sit a saddle. Young men and fools, Nandera said suddenly to no one in particular, sometimes bear pain they do not have to as a badge of their pride. And their foolishness. The Kara Karn, Sulan added dryly, also to the air, is not a fool, I think. Rand smiled back at Min fondly and gave Nandera and Sulan wry looks, but when he raised his eyes to Karuna again, they were stone once more. Very well. As she started forward, he added, but not from you. Her face grew so stiff it appeared ready to crack. Taim's mouth quirked in a wry, almost smile, and he stepped toward Rand, but without taking his eyes from Karuna, Rand flung out a hand behind him. From her. Come here, Alana. Perrin gave a start. Rand had pointed straight to Alana with never so much as a glance. That prickled something in the back of his head, but he could not make out what. It seemed to catch Taim as well. The man's face became a bland mask, yet dark eyes flickered between Rand and Alana, and the only name Perrin could put to the scent that writhed in his nose was puzzled. Alana gave a start too. For whatever reason, she had been on edge ever since joining Perrin on his way here, her serenity at best a thin veneer. Now she smoothed her skirts, shot a defiant stare at Karuna and Bera, of all people, and glided around in front of Rand. The other two sisters watched her, like teachers intending to make sure a pupil performed well, and still not convinced she would. Which made no sense. One of them might be the leader, yet Alana was Aes Sedai, the same as they. It all deepened Perrin's suspicion. Mixing with Aes Sedai was too much like wading the streams in the waterwood near to the mire. However peaceful the surface, currents beneath could snatch you off your feet. More undercurrents seemed to appear here every moment, and not all from the sisters. Shockingly, Rand cupped Alana's chin, turning her face up. There was a hiss of indrawn breath from Bera, and for once, Perrin agreed. Rand would not have been so forward with a girl at a dance back home, and Alana was not a girl at a dance. Just as surprising, her reaction was to blush and smell of uncertainty. Aes Sedai did not blush in Perrin's experience, and they were never uncertain. Heal me, Rand said, a command, not a request. The red in Alana's face deepened, and anger touched her scent. Her hands trembled as she reached up to take his head between them. Unconsciously, Perrin rubbed the palm of his hand, the one Ashido's spear had laid open yesterday. Karuna had healed several gashes in him, and he had had healing before, too. It felt like being plunged headfirst into a freezing pond. It left you gasping and shaking in weak-kneed. Hungry, too, usually. The only sign Rand gave that anything had been done, though, was a slight shiver. How do you stand the pain? Alana whispered at him. It's done, then, he said, removing her hands, and turned from her without a word of thanks. Seeming on the point of speaking, he paused, half turning to look back toward Demise Wells. They have all been found, Randolph Thor, Amis said gently. He nodded, then again, more briskly. It's time to be gone. Sorlia, will you name wise ones to take over the prisoners from the Ashaman? And also as companions for Karuna and my other liege women. For an instant he grinned. I wouldn't want them to err through ignorance. It shall be done as you say, Karakan, adjusting the shawl firmly. The leather-faced wise one addressed the three sisters. Join your friends until I can find someone to hold your hands. It was not unexpected that Bera would frown indignantly or Karuna become frost personified. Alana gazed brown, resigned, almost sullen. Soralea was having none of it. Clapping her hands sharply, she made brisk shooing motions. Well, move! Move! Reluctantly, the Aes Sedai let themselves be herded, making it seem they simply were going where they wished. Joining Soralea, Amis whispered something that Perrin did not quite catch. The three Aes Sedai apparently did, though. They stopped dead. Three very startled faces looking back at the wise ones. Soralea just clapped her hands again, louder than before, and shooed even more briskly. Scratching his beard, Perrin met Ruark's eyes. The clan chief smiled faintly and shrugged. Wise one's business. That was all very well for him. Aiel were fatalistic as wolves. Perrin glanced at Gedwin. The fellow was watching Soralea lecture the Aes Sedai. No, it was the sisters he watched. A fox staring at hens in a coop just out of his reach. The wise ones have to be better than the Ashaman, Perrin thought. They have to be. If Rand noticed the byplay, he ignored it. Taim, you take the Ashaman back to the Black Tower as soon as the wise ones have charge of the prisoners. As soon as. Remember to keep an eye out for any man who learns too fast. And remember what I said about recruiting. I can hardly forget, my Lord Dragon, the black-coated man replied dryly. I will handle that trip personally. But if I may bring it up again, you need a proper honor guard. We have been over that, Rand said curtly. I have better uses for the Ashaman. If I need an honor guard, those I am keeping will do. Perrin, will you? My Lord Dragon, Taim broke in. You need more than a few Ashaman around you. Rand's head turned toward Taim. His face matched any Aes Sedai for giving nothing away, but his scent made Perrin's ears try to lie back. Razor-sharp rage abruptly vanished in curiosity and caution. The one thin and probing, the other fog-like. Then, slashing murderous fury consumed both. Rand shook his head just slightly, and his smell became stony determination. Nobody's scent changed that fast. Nobody's. Taim had only his eyes to go by, of course, and all they could tell him was that Rand had shaken his head, if just barely. Think. You have chosen 4 dedicated and 4 soldiers. You should have Ashaman. Perrin did not understand that. He thought they were all Ashaman. You think I can't teach them as well as you? His voice was soft, the whisper of a blade sliding in its sheath. I think the Lord Dragon is too busy for teaching, Taim replied smoothly, yet the anger smell rose again. Too important. Take men who need the least of it. I can choose the furthest along. 1, Rand cut in, and I will choose. Taim smiled, spreading his hands in acquiescence, but the scent of frustration nearly overwhelmed anger. Again, Rand pointed without looking. Him. This time, he seemed surprised to find he was pointing directly at a man in his middle years, sitting atop an upturned cask on the other side of the wagon circle, paying no attention to the gathering around Rand. Instead, elbow on his knee and chin propped on his hand, he was frowning at the Aes Sedai prisoners. The sword and dragon glittered on the high collar of his black coat. What is his name, Taim? Dashiva, Taim said slowly, studying Rand. He smelled even more surprised than Rand did, and irritated too. Korlan Dashiva, from a farm in the Black Hills. He will do, Rand said, but he did not sound sure himself. Dashiva is gaining his strength rapidly, but his head is in the clouds often as not. Even when it isn't, he is not always entirely there. Maybe he's just a daydreamer, and maybe the taint on Saidin is touching his brain already. Better for you to choose Torval, or Rochade, or... Taim's opposition seemed to sweep away Rand's uncertainty. I said Dashiva will do. Tell him he's to come with me, then turn the prisoners over to the Wise Ones and go. I don't intend to stand here all day arguing. Perrin, ready everyone to move. Find me when they are. Without another word, he strode off, Min clinging to his arm, and Mandera and Sulin like shadows. Taim's dark eyes glittered, then he was stalking away himself, shouting for Gedwin and Rochade, Torval, and Kisman. Black-coated men came running. Perrin grimaced. With everything he had to tell Rand, he had not opened his mouth once. At that, maybe it would come better away from the Aes Sedai and the Wise Ones, and Taim. Really, there was not much for him to do. He was supposed to be in charge, since he had brought the rescue, but Ruark knew what needed doing better than he ever would, and a word to Dobrain and Javian was sufficient for the Karianen and Mayanners. They still wanted to say something, though they held back until they were alone and Perrin asked what it was. Then Javian burst out, Lord Perrin, it's the Dragon Reborn. All that searching through the corpses... It seemed a little excessive, Dobrain interrupted smoothly. We worry for him, as you can understand. A great deal depends on him. He might look a soldier, and he was, but he was a Karianen lord, too, and steeped in the game of houses, with all its careful talk, like any other Karianen. Perrin was not steeped in the game of houses. He's still sane, he said bluntly. Dobrain simply nodded, as if to say of course, shrugged to say he had never intended to question, but Javian went bright red. Watching them go to their men, Perrin shook his head. He hoped he was not lying. Gathering the Two Rivers men, he told them to saddle their horses and ignored all the bowing, most of which looked spur of the moment. Even Fail said that sometimes Two Rivers people carried bowing too far. She said they were still working out how to behave with a lord. He thought about shouting, I am not a lord at them, but he had done that before, and it never worked. When all the others rushed for their animals, Denel Luan and Ban Alcine remained behind. Cousins, both were beanpoles, and they looked much alike, except that Danel affected mustaches like downturned horns in the Tarabonner style, while Ban wore narrow lines of dark hair in the fashion of Arad Doman, beneath a nose like a pickaxe. Refugees had brought a lot of new things into the Two Rivers. Those Ashaman coming with us? Danel asked. When Perrin shook his head, he exhaled so hard in relief that his thick mustaches stirred. What about the Aes Sedai? Ban said anxiously. They'll go free now, won't they? I mean, Rand is free. The Lord Dragon, that is. They can't stay prisoners, not Aes Sedai. You two just have everybody ready to ride, Perrin said. Leave worrying about Aes Sedai to Rand. The pair even winced alike. Two fingers rose to scratch worriedly at mustaches, and Perrin jerked his hand away from his chin. The man looked as if he had fleas when he did that. The camp was a bustle in no time. Everyone had been expecting to move soon, yet everyone had things left undone. The captive Aes Sedai's servants and wagon drivers hurriedly loaded the last items into the wagons and began hitching teams with a jingle of harness. Karianen and Mayanners seemed to be everywhere, checking saddles and bridles. Unclothed Guy Shine went running every which way, though there did not seem to be much for the Aiel to ready. Flashes of light outside the wagons announced the departure of Taim and the Ashaman. That made Perrin feel better. Of the 9 who remained, another besides Dashiva was in his middle years, a stocky fellow with a farmer's face. and one with a limp and a fringe of white hair might easily have been a grandfather. The rest were younger, some little more than boys, yet they watched all the hubbub with the self-possession of men who had seen as much a dozen times. They did keep to themselves, though, and together, except for Dashiva, who stood a few paces apart, staring at nothing. Remembering Taim's caution about the fellow, Perrin hoped he was daydreaming. He found Rand seated on a wooden crate with his elbows on his knees. Suolin and Nandera squatted easily to either side of Rand, both studiously avoiding looking at the sword at his hip. Holding their spears and bullhide bucklers casually, here in the midst of people loyal to Rand, they kept a watch on anything that moved near him. Min sat on the ground at his feet with her legs tucked under, smiling up at him. "I hope you know what you're doing, Rand," Perrin said, shifting the axe haft so he could drop to his heels. No one was close enough to hear except for Rand and Min and the two maidens. If Suolin or Nandera went running to the Wise Ones, so be it. Without more preamble, he launched into what he had seen so far this morning. What he had smelled, too, though he did not say that. Rand was not among the few who knew about him and wolves. He made it all seem what he had seen and heard. The Ashaman and the Wise Ones, the Ashaman and the Aes Sedai, the Wise Ones and the Aes Sedai, the whole tangle of tinder that might burst into flame any moment. He did not spare the Two Rivers men. They're worried, Rand, and if they are sweating, you can be sure some Karienin is thinking about doing something. Or a Tyrant. Maybe just helping the prisoners escape. Maybe something worse. Light, I could see Danil and Ban and 50 more besides helping them get away, if they knew how. "You think something else would be that much worse?" Rand said quietly, and Perrin's skin prickled. He met Rand's gaze directly. 1,000 times, he said in just as quiet a voice. "I won't be part of murder. If you will be, I'll stand in your way." A silence stretched, unblinking blue-gray eyes meeting unblinking golden. Frowning at each of them in turn, Min made an exasperated sound in her throat. "You two bullheads! Rand, you know you'll never give an order like that, or let anyone else give it either. Perrin, you know he won't. Now the pair of you stop acting like two strange roosters in a pen." Suolin chuckled, but Perrin wanted to ask Min how certain she was, although that was not a question he could voice here. Rand scrubbed his fingers through his hair, then shook his head, for all the world like a man disagreeing with somebody who was not there. The sort of voice that madmen heard. "It's never easy, is it?" Rand said after a time, looking sad. "The bitter truth is I can't say which would be worse. I don't have any good choices. They saw to that themselves." His face was despondent, but rage boiled in his scent. "Alive or dead, they're a millstone on my back, and either way they could break it." Perrin followed his gaze to the Aes Sedai prisoners. They were on their feet now, and all together, though even so they managed to put a little distance between the three who had been stilled and the rest. The Wise Ones around them were being curt with their orders by the gestures they made and the tight faces in the sisters. Maybe the Wise Ones were better than Rand keeping them too. If only he could be sure. "Did you see anything, Min?" Rand said. Perrin gave a start and directed a warning glance at Suolin and Nandera, but Min laughed softly. Leaning against Rand's knee, she really did look the Min he knew, for the first time since finding her at the well. "Perrin, they know about me. The Wise Ones, the Maidens, maybe all of them. And they don't care." She had a talent she kept hidden, much as he did the wolves. Sometimes she saw images and auras around people. Sometimes she knew what they meant. "You can't know what it's like, Perrin. I was 12 when it started, and I didn't know to make a secret of it. Everybody thought I was just making things up. Until I said a man on the next street was going to marry a woman I saw with him, only he was already married. When he ran off with her, his wife brought a mob to my aunt's house claiming I was responsible, that I'd used the one power on her husband or given the two of them some kind of potion." Min shook her head. She wasn't too clear. She just had to blame somebody. There was talk of me being a dark friend, too. There had been some white cloaks in town earlier, trying to stir people up. Anyway, Aunt Rana convinced me to say I had just overheard them talking, and Aunt Mirren promised to spank me for spreading tales, and Aunt Jan said she'd dose me. They didn't, of course. They knew the truth. But if they hadn't been so matter-of-fact about me just being a child, I could have been hurt or even killed. Most people don't like somebody knowing things about their future. Most people don't really want to know it themselves, not unless it's good anyway. Even my aunts didn't. But to the Aiel, I am sort of a wise one by courtesy. Some can do things others cannot, Mandera said, as if that was enough explanation. Min laughed again and reached out to touch the maiden's knee. Thank you. Settling her feet beneath her, she looked up at Rand. Now that she was laughing again, she seemed radiant. That held even after she became serious. Serious and not very pleased. As for your question, nothing of any use. Taim has blood in his past and blood in his future, but you could guess that. He's a dangerous man. They seem to be gathering images like Aes Sedai. A sidelong look through lowered eyelashes at Tashiva and the other Ashaman said who she meant. Most people had few images around them, but Min said Aes Sedai and warders always did. The problem is, what I can see is all blurry. I think it's because they're holding the power. That often seems true with Aes Sedai, and it's worse when they're actually channeling. Karuna and that lot have all sorts of things around them, but they stay so close together that it all, well, jumbles together most of the time. It's even muddier with the prisoners. Never mind the prisoners, Rand told her. That's what they'll stay. But Rand, I keep feeling there is something important. If I could only pick it out. You need to know. If you don't know everything, you must go on with what you do know, Rand quoted wryly. It seems I never do know everything. Hardly enough, most of the time. But there's no choice but to go on, is there? That was not at all a question. Loyal strode up, bubbling with energy despite his obvious weariness.
Rand, they say they're ready to go, but you promised to talk to me while it's fresh.
Abruptly, his ears twitched with embarrassment, and that booming voice became plaintive.
I am sorry. I know it can't be enjoyable, but I must know. For the book. For the ages.
Laughing, Rand got to his feet and tugged at the Ogier's open coat. For the ages? Do writers all talk like that? Don't worry, Loyal. It will still be fresh when I tell you. I won't forget. A grim, sour scent flashed from him despite the smile and was gone. But back in Kyrian, after we all have a bath and sleep in a bed. Rand motioned for Tashiva to come closer. The man was not skinny, yet he moved in a hesitant, creeping way, hands folded at his waist, that made him seem so. My Lord Draken, he said, tilting his head. Can you make a gateway, Tashiva? Of course. Tashiva began dry-washing his hands, flicking at his lips with the tip of his tongue, and Perrin wondered whether the man was always this jittery, or just when speaking to the Dragon Reborn. That is to say, the Mahale teaches traveling as soon as a student shows himself strong enough.
I play that a lot
the Mahale, too. Rand said, blinking. The Lord Mazrim Taim's title, my Lord Dragon. It means leader, in the old tongue. The fellow's smile managed to be nervous and patronizing at the same time.
That WWE one's a good one.
I read a great deal on the farm.
I got that.
Every book the peddlers brought by. The Mahale, Rand muttered disapprovingly. Well, be that as it may, make me a gateway to near Kyrian, Tashiva. It's time to see what the world has been up to while I was away, and what I have to do about it. He laughed then, in a rueful way, but the sound of it made Perrin's skin prickle. Chapter 3. Hill of the Golden Dawn. On a wide, low hilltop some miles north and east of the city of Kyrian, well away from any road or human habitation, a thin vertical slash of pure light appeared, taller than a man on a horse. The ground sloped away in every direction, undulating gently. Nothing more than occasional brush obscured the view for more than a mile, all the way to the surrounding forest. Brown grass fell as the light seemed to rotate, widening into a square opening in midair. A number of the dead stems were slit lengthwise, sliced finer than any razor could have, by
Oh,
a
yeah.
hole in the air. The instant the gateway was fully open, veiled Aiel poured out, men and maidens spreading in every direction to encircle the hill. Almost hidden in the torrent, 4 sharp-eyed Ashaman took up positions around the gateway itself, peering toward the encircling woodland. Nothing stirred except with the wind, dust, tall grass, and branches in the distance. Yet each Ashaman studied the vista with the fervor of a starving hawk searching for a rabbit. A rabbit watching for a hawk might have been his intent, but never with that air of menace. There was really no break in the flow. One moment it was a flood of Aiel, the next mounted Carian and armsmen galloping out 2 by 2, the crimson banner of light going up at their head as soon as it cleared the gateway. Without a pause, Dobrain drew his men aside and began forming them up a little down the slope, helmeted and gauntleted in precise ranks, lances raised to the same angle. Seasoned campaigners, they were ready to wheel and charge in any direction at his gesture. On the heels of the last Kyrianan, Perrin rode Stepper through, the dun passing in one stride from the hill below Demise Wells to the hill in Kyrian, and ducked in spite of himself. The upper edge of the thing stood well above his head, but he had seen the damage a gateway could do, and had no wish to test whether they were safer standing still. Loyal and Daram followed close behind. The Ogier afoot with his long-hafted axe on his shoulder bent his knees. And then the 2 Rivers men, crouching on their saddles well beyond the gateway. Rad al-Dai carried the red wolf head banner, Perrin's, because everyone said it was, and Tel Luan the red eagle. Perrin tried not to look at those, especially the red eagle. The 2 Rivers men wanted things both ways. He was a lord, so he had to have banners. He was a lord, but when he told them to get rid of those bloody banners, they never vanished for long. The red wolf had named him something he was not, and did not want to be, while the red eagle... More than 2,000 years after Manetheren died in the Trolloc Wars, close to 1,000 after Andor swallowed part of what once had been Manetheren, that banner was still as good as an act of rebellion for an Anderman. Legends still walked in some men's minds. Of course, it had been a few generations since 2 Rivers folk had had any notion that they were Andermen, but Queen's minds did not change so easily. He had met the new Queen of Andor, what seemed a long time ago, in the Stone of Tyr. She had not been queen then, and was not yet really until she was crowned in Caemlyn. But Elaine seemed a pleasant young woman, and pretty, though he was not partial to fair-haired women. A bit taken with herself, of course, as daughter heir. Taken with Rand, too, if snuggling in corners meant anything. Rand meant to give her not only the Lion Throne of Andor, but the Sun Throne of Kyrian. Surely she would be grateful enough to let the flying of the flag pass, when it did not really mean anything. Watching the 2 Rivers men deploy behind those banners, Perrin shook his head. It was a worry for another day, in any case. There was nothing like armsmen's precision in the 2 Rivers men, most boys like Todd, farmers' sons and shepherds, yet they knew what to do. Every 5th man took the reins of 4 more horses, while the other riders hurriedly dismounted, longbows already strung and in hand. Those on the ground straggled together in rough lines, looking around with more interest than anything else, but they checked their quivers with practiced gestures and handled their bows with familiarity. The great 2 Rivers bows, even when strung, nearly as tall as the men who drew them. With those bows, not a man of them but could shoot farther than anyone outside the 2 Rivers would believe, and hit what he aimed at. Perrin hoped there would be none of that today. Sometimes he dreamed of a world where there never was. And Rand? You believe my enemies have been asleep while I was away Rand had said suddenly as they stood waiting for Dashiva to open the gateway. He had on a coat rooted out of the wagons, well-cut green wool, but hardly what he usually wore now. Short of taking the coat off a warder's back or a cotton sore from an Ayuman, it was the only garment in the camp to fit him. Truth, he would have thought he insisted on silk and fine embroidery, the way he had had those wagons searched top to bottom yesterday and this morning. The wagons stretched out in line, teams hitched, canvas covers and iron hoops taken down. Karuna and the rest of the sworn sisters sat packed into the head wagon and not happy. They had ceased their protests as soon as they saw that protesting did no good, but Perrin could still hear coldly angry mutters. At least they rode. Their warders surrounded the wagon afoot, silent and stony, while the Aes Sedai prisoners stood in a rigid, sullen cluster ringed by every wise one who was not with Rand, which was to say all but Soralea and Amis. The prisoners' warders glowered in another clump 100 paces off, cold death waiting despite their injuries as Iswaimon guards. Except for Karuna's big black, its reins held by Rand, and a mouse-colored mare with fine ankles for Min, the Aes Sedai's and warders' horses, not assigned to Ashaman, or used to fill out wagon teams, that had caused a commotion worse than making their owners walk, were all tied to long lead lines fastened to the wagon's tailgates. Do you believe it, Flynn? Grady? One of the Ashaman waiting to go through first, the stocky fellow with a farmer's face, looked at Rand uncertainly, then at the leathery old man with the limp. Each wore a silver sword pin on his collar, but not the dragon. Only a fool thinks his enemies stand still when he isn't looking, my lord dragon, the old man said in a gruff voice. He sounded like a soldier. What about you, Dashiva? Dashiva gave a start, surprised to be addressed. I grew up on a farm. He tugged his sword belt straight, which he did not need. Supposedly they trained with the swords as much as with the power, but Dashiva did not seem to know one end from the other. I don't know much about having enemies. Despite his awkwardness, there was a kind of insolence to him. But then the whole lot seemed weaned on arrogance. If you stay near me, Rand said softly, you will. His smile made Perrin shiver. He smiled while he gave orders to go through the gateway, as though they would be attacked on the other side. There were enemies everywhere, he told them. Always remember that. There were enemies everywhere, and you never knew who. The exodus continued unabated. Wagons rumbled from Dumai's Wells to Carian, the sisters in the first like statues of ice being lurched about. Their warders trotted alongside, hands gripping sword hilts and eyes never resting on one spot. Clearly they thought their Aes Sedai needed protection, as much from those already on the hill as from anyone who might appear. The wise ones marched through, herding their charges. A number used sticks to prod the Aes Sedai along, though the sisters made a good job pretending there were neither wise ones nor prods. The Shido Gaishain came, trotting in a column 4 wide under the gaze of a single maiden. She pointed to a place out of the way before darting to join the other Farder Izmai, and the Gaishain knelt there in lines, naked as jaybirds and proud as eagles. The remaining warders followed under their guard, radiating a massed fury that Perrin could smell over everything else. Then Ruark with the rest of the Siswayaman and maidens, and 4 more Ashaman, each leading a second horse for one of the first 4, and Narella and his winged guards with their red-streamered lances. The Mayenners were puffed up over being the rear guard, laughing and shouting boasts to the Carianan of what they would have done had the Shido returned. Though in fact they were not last. Last of all came Rand on Karuna's gelding and Min on her mare. Soralea and Amis strode along to one side of the tall black horse, then Dara and half a dozen maidens to the other, and Dashiva led a placid-looking bay mare at their heels. The gateway winked out, and Dashiva blinked at where it had been, smiling faintly, then scrambled clumsily into the mare's saddle. He seemed to be talking to himself, but it was probably because his sword tangled in his legs, and he nearly fell. Surely he was not mad already. An army covered the hill, all arrayed for an attack that plainly was not coming. A small army, only a few thousand, though it would have seemed fair-sized before the Aiel brought their numbers across the dragon wall. Guiding his horse slowly toward Perrin, Rand scanned the countryside. The two wise ones followed closely, talking softly and watching him. And Dara and the maidens followed, watching everything else. Had Rand been a wolf, Perrin would have said he was testing the air. He carried the dragon scepter across his high saddle bow, a 2-foot length of spear decorated with a green and white tassel and carved with dragons, and now and then weighed it lightly in his hand as if to remind himself of it. When Rand reined in, he studied Perrin as intently as he had the surrounding country. "I trust you," he said finally, nodding. Min stirred in her saddle, and he added, "And you, Min, of course. And you too, Loyal." The Ogier shifted uncertainly, with a hesitant glance for Perrin. Rand looked around the hillside, at the Aiel, and the Ashaman, and all the rest. "So few I can trust," he whispered tiredly. His scent was jumbled enough for 2 men, anger and fear, determination and despair. And woven through it all, weariness. "Be sane," Perrin wanted to tell him. "Hold on." A wash of guilt held his tongue, though. Because it was the dragon reborn he wanted to say it to, not his friend since childhood. He wanted his friend to stay sane. The dragon reborn had to stay sane. "My Lord Dragon," one of the Ashaman called abruptly. He looked little more than a boy, with dark eyes as big as any girl's, and neither sword nor dragon on his collar, but pride in his bearing. "Narishma," Perrin had heard him called. "To the southwest." A figure had appeared, running out from the trees a mile or more away. A woman with skirts hiked to her thighs. Perrin's eyes, she was clearly Aiel. A wise one, he thought, though there was no real way to tell at sight. He was just certain. The sight of her brought back all his edginess. Somebody out here, just where they happened to come out of the gateway, could not be good news. The shadow had been troubling Kyrian again when he set off after Rand. But to the Aiel, a wise one was a wise one, whatever her clan. They visited like neighbors over tea while their clans killed one another. 2 Aiel trying to kill each other would step back to let a wise one pass between. Maybe yesterday had changed that, and maybe not. He exhaled wearily. At best, she could not be good news. Nearly everyone on the hill seemed to feel the same. Ripples of motion ran everywhere, spears hefted, arrows knocked. Kyrianen and Mayenners shifted in their saddles, and Aram drew his sword, eyes shining with anticipation. Loyal leaned on his tall axe and fingered the edge regretfully. The head was shaped like that of a huge wood axe, but engraved with leaves and scrolls, and inlaid with gold. The inlay was a trifle scuffed from the axe's late use. If he had to use it again, he would, but with as much reluctance as Perrin used his, and for many of the same reasons. Rand simply sat his horse and watched, face unreadable. Min edged her mare close enough to stroke his shoulder, like someone trying to soothe a mastiff with its hackles up. The wise ones also gave no sign of disturbance, but neither did they stay still. Soralia gestured, and a dozen of the women guarding the Aes Sedai broke off to join her and Amis, well away from Rand and out of even Perrin's hearing. Few had any gray in their hair, and Soralia's was the only lined face, but then there was hardly a gray hair to be seen on any of the wise ones here. The fact was, not many Aiel lived to have much gray hair. These women had position, though, or influence, however wise ones decided such things. Perrin had seen Soralia and Amis confer with the same lot before, though confer was not quite the word. Soralia spoke, with an occasional word from Amis, and the others listened. Dara raised a protest, but Soralia smothered it, apparently without breaking stride, then pointed out 2 of their number, Satarin and Kosain. Immediately, they gathered their skirts over their arms and sped off toward the newcomer, legs flashing. Perrin patted Stepper's neck. No more killing. Not yet. The 3 wise ones met nearly half a mile from the hill and stopped. They spoke, just for a moment, and then all came on at a run, back to the hill, and straight to Soralia.
I'll be right back.
The newcomer, a youngish, long-nosed woman with a mass of incredibly red hair, spoke hurriedly. Sorlea's face grew stonier by the word. Finally, the red-haired woman finished, or rather, Sorlea cut her short with a few words, and the lot turned to face Rand. None made a move toward him, though. They waited, hands folded at their waists and shawls looped over their arms, inscrutable as any Aes Sedai. The Kara Khan, Rand muttered dryly under his breath. Swinging a leg over, he slid from his saddle, then helped Min to the ground. Perrin climbed down too and led Stepper after them to the Wise Ones. Loyal trailed along, and Aram followed on his horse, not dismounting until Perrin motioned him to. Aiel did not ride, not unless it was absolutely necessary anyway, and they considered it rude for anyone to face them from horseback. Ruark joined them, and Gaul, who wore a scowl for some reason. It went without saying that Nandera and Suilin and the maidens came too. The red-haired newcomer began as soon as Rand drew near. Baron Megana set watches everywhere you might possibly come back to the Tree-Killer City, Karakan. But in truth, no one thought this would be... Paragon, Sorlea said, sharply enough to draw blood. The red-haired woman's teeth clicked as she snapped her mouth shut, and she stared fixedly at Rand with brilliant blue eyes, avoiding Sorlea's glare. Finally, Sorlea took a breath and turned her attention to Rand. There is trouble in the tents, she said in a flat voice. Rumors began among the tree killers that you have gone to the White Tower with the Aes Sedai who came. Gone to bend knee to the Amerlin seat. None who know the truth dared speak, or the result would have been worse. And what is the result? Rand asked quietly. He exuded tension, and Min began stroking his shoulder again. Many
Hey,
believe
Christopher,
you have
how you
abandoned
doing?
the Aiel,
Hope you're doing
Amis told
good.
him just as quietly. The bleakness has returned. Every day 1,000 or more throw down their spears and vanish, unable to face our future or our past.
Salut Chris, j'espère que tu vas bien.
Past. Some may be going to the Shido. For a moment, disgust tinged her voice. There have been whispers that the true Karakan would not give himself to the Aes Sedai. Indirian says if you have gone to the White Tower, it cannot be willingly. He is ready to take the Kodara north, to Tarvalon, and dance the spears with any Aes Sedai he finds. Or any Wetlander. He says you must have been betrayed. Timolen mutters that if the tales are true, you have betrayed us, and he will take the Miagoma back to the Threefold Land after he sees you dead. Mandalane and Janwin hold their counsel, but they listened to Indirian and Timolen both. Ruark grimaced, sucking air between his teeth. For an Aiel, this was as much as tearing his hair in despair. It's not good news, Perrin protested, but you make it sound a death sentence. Once Rand shows himself, the rumors are done. Rand scrubbed a hand through his hair. If that was so, Sorlea wouldn't look like she had swallowed a lizard. For that matter, Nandera and Suilin looked as though their lizards were still alive on the way down. What haven't you told me yet, Sorlea? The leather-faced woman gave him a thin, approving smile. You see beyond what is said. Good. Her tone stayed flat as worked stone, though. You return with Aes Sedai. Some will believe that means you did bend knee. Whatever you say or do, they will believe you wear an Aes Sedai halter. And that is before it is known you were a prisoner. Secrets find crevices a flea could not slip through, and a secret known by so many has wings. Perrin eyed Dobrain and Norella, watching with their men, and swallowed queasily. How many of those who followed Rand did so because he had the weight of the Aiel massed behind him? Not all, certainly, but for every man who had chosen because Rand was the Dragon Reborn, 5 or even 10 had come because the light shone brightest on the strongest ranks. If the Aiel broke away, or splintered... He did not want to think about that possibility. Defending the two rivers had stretched his abilities as far as they would go, maybe farther. To Viren or not, he had no illusions he was one of those men who ended up in the histories. That was for Rand. Village-sized problems were his limit. Yet he could not help himself. His mind churned. What to do if the worst came? Lists ran up in his head. Who would remain loyal, and who might try to slip away? The first list was sufficiently short, and the second sufficiently long to dry his throat. Too many people still schemed for advantage, as if they had never heard of the prophecies of the dragon or the last battle. He suspected some still would the day after Tarmangaden began. The worst of it was, most would not be Darklands, just people looking out for their own interests first. Royal's ears hung limp. He saw it too. No sooner did Sorleia finish speaking to Rand than her eyes whipped to one side in a glare to bore holes in iron. You were told to remain in the wagon. Vera and Karuna came to an abrupt halt, and Alana nearly stumbled into them. You were told not to touch the One Power without permission, but you listened to what was said here. You will learn that I mean what I say. Despite Sorleia's auguring stare, the three held their ground. Vera and Karuna with icy dignity, Alana with smoldering defiance. Loyal's huge eyes rolled toward them, then toward the Wise One. If his ears had been limp before, now they wilted completely, and his long eyebrows dropped to his cheeks. Poring uneasily over his mental lists, Perrin wondered absently how far the Aes Sedai intended to push. Eavesdropping with the power? They might find a reaction from the Wise Ones worse than Sorleia's bark. From Rand, too. Not this time, however. Rand seemed unaware of them. He looked right through Sorleia. Or maybe he listened to something nobody else could hear again. What of the Wetlanders? He said finally. Colaver has been crowned queen, hasn't she? It was not really a question. Sorleia nodded, thumb tapping the hilt of her belt knife, but her attention never left the Aes Sedai. Who was chosen king or queen among the Wetlanders was of small concern to Aiel, especially among the tree-killing Carrienin. An icicle stabbed into Perrin's chest. That Colaver of House Saigon wanted the Sun Throne was no secret. She had schemed for it from the day Goldrian Riotin was assassinated, before Rand had even declared himself the Dragon Reborn, and kept scheming after it became public knowledge that Rand meant the throne for Elaine. Few knew she was a cold-blooded murderer, however, and Fail was in the city. At least she was not alone. Bane and Chiad would be close to her. They were maidens and her friends, maybe almost what the Aiel called near sisters. They would not let her be harmed. The icicle would not go away, though. Colaver hated Rand, and by extension, anyone close to Rand, such as perhaps the wife of a man who was Rand's friend. No, Bane and Chiad would keep her safe.
Nice.
This is a delicate situation. Moving closer to Rand, remarkably, Karuna ignored Sorleia. For such a scrawny woman, the Wise One had eyes like hammers. Whatever you do can have serious repercussions. What has Colaver said about me? Rand asked Sorleia in a too casual tone. Has she harmed Berelain? Berelain, the first of Mayenne, was who Rand had left in charge of Cairhien. Why did he not ask about Fail? Berelain Sir Drag is well, Sorleia murmured, without stopping her study of the Aes Sedai. Outwardly, Karuna stayed calm despite being interrupted and ignored, but the gaze she fixed on Rand could have frozen a forge fire solid with the bellows pumping. For the rest, Sorleia gestured to Ferregan. The red-haired woman gave a start and cleared her throat. Plainly, she had not expected to be allowed a word. She put dignity back on like a hastily donned garment. Colaver Saigon says you have gone to Cainman, Karakan, or maybe to Tyr, but wherever you have gone, All must remember that you are the dragon reborn and must be obeyed. Reagan sniffed. The dragon reborn was no part of Aiel prophecies, only the Karakan. She says you will return and confirm her on the throne. She speaks often to the chiefs, encouraging them to move the spears south. In obedience to you, she says. She does not see the wise ones and hears only the wind when we speak. This time her sniff was a fair approximation of Soralia's. No one told the clan chiefs what to do, but angering the wise ones was a bad way to start convincing the chiefs of anything. It made sense to Perrin, though, to the part of him that could think of anything besides Fail. Coliver probably had never paid enough attention to the savages to realize the wise ones did more than dispense herbs. But she would want every last Aiel out of Carrion. The question was, given the circumstances, had any of the chiefs listened to her? But the question Rand asked was not the obvious. What else has happened in the city? Anything you've heard, Reagan? Maybe something that might only seem important to a wetlander. She tossed her red mane contemptuously. Wetlanders are like sandflies, Karakan. Who can know what they find important? Strange things sometimes happen in the city, so I have heard, as they do among the tents. People sometimes see things that cannot be. Only for a time what cannot be is. Men, women, children have died. Perrin's skin prickled. He knew she meant what Rand called bubbles of evil, rising from the Dark One's prison like froth in a fetid swamp, drifting along the pattern till they burst. Perrin had been caught in one once. He never wanted to see another. If you mean what the wetlanders do, she went on, who has time to watch sandflies, unless they bite? That reminds me of one thing. I do not understand it, but perhaps you do. These sandflies will bite sooner or later. What sandflies? Wetlanders? What are you talking about? Reagan was not as good as Soralia at that level look, yet no wise one that Perrin had seen appreciated others' impatience. Not even the chief of chiefs. Thrusting her chin up, she gathered her shawl and answered. 3 days ago, the tree killers, Caroline Damadred and Toram Ryanton, approached the city. They issued a proclamation that Coliver Saigon is a usurper, but they sit in their camp south of the city and do nothing except send a few people into the city now and then. Away from their camp, 100 of them will run from one Algaid Siswai, or even a Gashain. The man called Darlin Cisnera and other tyrants arrived by ship below the city yesterday and joined them. They have been feasting and drinking ever since, as if celebrating something. Tree killer soldiers gather in the city at Colver Saigon's command, yet they watch our tents more than they do the other wetlanders or the city itself. They watch and do nothing. Perhaps you know the why of all this, Karakan, but I do not. Nor does Bear or Magana, or anyone else in the tents. Lady Caroline and Lord Toram led the Carrienan who refused to accept that Rand and the Aiel had conquered Carrien, just as High Lord Darlin led their counterparts in Tyr.
Oh yeah, dab time.
Neither revolt amounted to much.
I had a
Caroline and
little dab.
Toram had been sitting in the foothills of the spine of the world for months, making threats and claims, and Darlin the same down in Haddon Mer.
Good thing I saw
But
that.
not any longer.
I got
it seemed.
distracted. I'm watching a movie right
Perrin
here
found
also.
himself running a thumb
Well, I have
lightly
a
along the
movie
edge of his
going
axe.
with subtitles.
The Aiel were in danger of slipping away, and Rand's enemies were coming together in one place. All it needed now
Well,
was for
subtitles
Forsaken
in.
to appear, and Savannah with her Shido. That would put the cream on the honey cake. Yet none of it was any more important than whether somebody saw a nightmare walking. Aiel had to be safe. She just had to be. Better watching than fighting, Rand murmured thoughtfully, listening to something unseen again. Perrin agreed with Rand wholeheartedly. Just about anything was better than fighting. But Aiel did not see it that way, not when it came to enemies. From Ruark to Soralia, Foragan to Nandera and Sulin, they stared as though Rand had said sand was better to drink than water. Foragan drew herself up practically on tiptoe. She was not particularly tall for an Aiel woman, not quite Turan's shoulder. She appeared to be trying to put herself nose to nose. There are few more than 10,000 in that Wetlander camp, she said reprovingly, and fewer in the city. They can be dealt with easily. Even Endirian remembers that you command no Wetlander killed, except in self-defense. But they will make trouble left to themselves. It does not help that there are Aes Sedai in the city. Who can know what they... Aes Sedai. The words came out cold, Rand's knuckles white on the dragon scepter. How many? At the smell of him, the skin between Perrin's shoulders crawled. Suddenly he could feel the Aes Sedai prisoners watching, and Bera and Karuna and the rest. Soralia lost all interest in Karuna. Her hands planted themselves on her hips, and her mouth narrowed. Why did you not tell me this? You gave me no chance, Soralia, Foregan protested a touch breathily, shoulders hunching. Blue eyes swung to Rand, and her voice firmed.
Battery low.
Aw. I'm gonna charge my battery. Thankfully, it's a good battery. I just have to use a good speaker. I just gotta use my other speaker. That's what we've been listening on. But I gotta charge it, so. Just give me a sec. And I gotta use this cheap little generic one. That still works great. I ain't complaining on it. Still does the job and works real good.
Bluetooth mode.
It's just that on this one, the Skull Candy one, I got a pretty good deal off of a marketplace. 40 bucks for a Skull Candy Bluetooth speaker. I couldn't pass that up. And that one I just showed you was one I got on eBay.
Maybe as many as 10 or more, Karakan. We avoid them, of course, especially since... Back to Soralia and Bruthiness. You did not want to hear about the Wetlanders, Soralia. Only our own chance. You said so. To Rand, her back straightening. Most of them stay beneath the roof of Arlen Dulane, Karakan, and seldom leave it. To Soralia, hunching. Soralia, you know I would have told you everything. You cut me short. As she realized how many were watching, how many beginning to smile, among the wise ones anyway. Foregan's eyes grew wild, and her cheeks reddened. Her head swung between Rand and Soralia,
speaker I paid
and her mouth worked
40
no
bucks
sound
on
came out.
Facebook.
Some of the wise ones began laughing behind their hands. Vidara did not bother with a hand.
And then this one
is
like the brand on is like T&G.
did not feel like laughing.
This one was like
And Aiel could find something
like
funny
10
in having her
bucks,
sword stuck through
15 bucks on eBay,
Aes Sedai on top of everything else. Light.
which I can't
He cut
complain
straight
because
through to what was important.
it works pretty good.
Foregan, my wife, Aiel. Is she well? She gave him a half-distracted stare, then visibly pulled together the tatters.
I got a big set of earphones that are
I think Aiel Avara is well as I
I
can.
use those
She
ones
said
for my
with cool
gaming.
composure. Or almost.
Mainly because it has a
She tried to
they're
sneak glances at
Bluetooth,
Soralia
but
from the corner
I
of
can
her eye.
actually plug them into my controller.
Soralia was not amused, or anything close to it. Arms folded, she gave Foregan a perusal that made the one she had given Karuna seem mild.
Oh yeah, I always get good
Amis
deals.
put a hand on Soralia's arm. She is not at fault, the younger woman murmured, too softly to reach any ears but the leathery wise ones and Perrin's. Soralia hesitated, then nodded. The flaying glare faded to her usual cantankerness. Amis was the only one Perrin had seen able to do that, the only one Soralia did not trample down when she got in her way. Well, she did not trample Ruark, but with him it was more a boulder ignoring a thunderstorm. Amis could make it stop raining. Perrin wanted more of Reagan. She thought Aiel was well. But before he could open his mouth, Karuna bulled in with her usual tact. Now listen to me carefully, she told Rand, gesturing emphatically under his nose. I called the situation delicate. It is not. The situation is complex beyond your imagining. So fragile a breath could shatter it. Bera and I will accompany you to the city. Yes, yes, Alana, and you as well. She waved away the slender Aes Sedai impatiently. Perrin thought she was trying that looming trick. She did seem to be peering down her nose at Rand. Though tall as she was, she stood head and shoulders taller.
The Skull Candy one, it was someone
you must let yourself be
in
guided by
town
us.
that had
One wrong move, one
had that
wrong
one.
word, and you may
And then
deliver
they
to
got
Tyrion the same disaster you gave Taraban and
a
Aradoma.
bigger one. And
Worse,
decided to
you
get
can
rid of
do
that one. That was
incalculable
still brand
damage
new.
to
I
matters about
got
which you
the
know
box and
almost
everything.
nothing. Perrin winced. The whole speech could not have been better designed to inflame Rand.
Got in a box,
But
still
Rand
brand
simply
new
listened
looking.
till
He
she was
just
done, then turned to
upgraded to a
Sorley.
bigger speaker.
Take the Aes Sedai to the tents.
Which he had
All
the
of them,
money. He
for
was
now. Make sure everyone knows they're Aes Sedai.
one of those ones that's
Let it be
from
seen that they hop when you
they're
say
coming
toad.
from another state that comes
Since you
to
hop
town
when the
for,
Karn says
oil
it,
field
that should
work.
convince everybody I'm not
So,
wearing an Aes Sedai
they
leash.
make that good money to where
Karuna's face grew bright
they'll
red.
buy that,
She
get a
smelled of
bigger one,
outrage and
and still
indignation
be
so
brand
strongly
new.
that Perrin's nose itched. Vera tried to calm her without much success, while shooting you ignorant young lout looks at Rand, and Alana bit her lip in an effort not
Good
to
way
smile.
pick up stuff is from
Going by the
oil field
odors
workers
drifting from
that's
Sorley and the others,
gotten
Alana had
something
no
new
reason
or
to be
upgraded.
pleased. Sorley gave
And what
Rand a
they had
slash.
originally wasn't that old to begin with.
Perhaps,
I think mainly because
Perrin doubted that.
they have the money to be able to spend like that
Perhaps
because
it will.
how much they make out in
She
the
did not
field.
sound convinced. With another shake of his head,
They pull in a
Rand
good little
stalked off
chunk of
with
change
men,
working there.
shouted by the maidens and issuing orders as to who was to go with him and who with the wise ones. Ruark began ordering the Siswayaman. Alana followed Rand with her eyes. Perrin wished he knew what was going on there. Sorley and the others watched Rand too, and they smelled anything but gentle. Reagan was standing alone, he realized. Now was his chance. But when he tried to catch her up, Sorley and Demise and the rest of the council surrounded her, neatly shouldering him away. They moved some distance before they began showering her with questions, the sharp looks directed at Karuna and the two other sisters, leaving no doubt they would tolerate no further eavesdropping. Karuna appeared to be considering it, glowering till it seemed to wonder her dark hair was not standing on end. Bera was speaking to her firmly and without trying. Bera heard sensible and patient, cautious and foolish. Which applied to whom was not evident. There will be fighting when we reach the city, Aram sounded eager. Of course not, Boyle said stoutly. His ears twitched and he peered uncomfortably at his axe. There won't be, will there, Perrin? Perrin shook his head. He did not know. If only the other wise ones would leave Ferregan alone just for a few moments. What did they have to talk about that was so important? Women, Gaul muttered, are stranger than drunken wetlanders. What? Perrin said absently. What would happen should he simply push through the circle of wise ones? As if she had read his mind, Idara gave him a pointed frown. So did some of the others. Sometimes it did seem women could read men's minds. Well, they said women are strange, Perrin Ibarra. Chiad told me she would not lay a bridal wreath at my feet. She actually told me. The Aielman sounded scandalized. She said she would take me for a lover, her and Bane, but no more. Another time that would have shocked Perrin, though he had heard it before. Aiel were incredibly free about such things. As if I am not good enough for a husband, Gaul snorted angrily. I do not like Bane, but I would marry her to make Chiad happy. If Chiad will not make a bridal wreath, she should stop trying to entice me. If I cannot catch her interest well enough for her to marry me. She should let me go. Rand frowned at him. The green-eyed Aielman was taller than Rand, nearly a head taller than he. What are you talking about? Chiad, of course. Have you not been listening? She avoids me, but every time I see her, she pauses long enough to make sure I have seen her. I do not know how you wetlanders do it, but with us, that is one of the ways a woman uses. When you least expect her, she is in your eyes, then gone. I did not even know she was with the maidens until this morning. You mean she's here? Theron whispered. That icicle was back now a blade, hollowing him out.
Yeah, cheers. About to load up a
Here
boat.
too?
I don't feel like
Gaul
rolling one. That last one I rolled.
One is seldom far from the other.
That was a brutal one.
But it's Chiad's interest I want, not Bane's. Burn your bloody interest, Theron shouted. The wise ones turned to look at him. In fact, people all over the hillside did.
I don't want to tip it
Aruna
too
and
much
Vera
because
were
it's already all
staring,
broken up.
faces entirely too
How we go everywhere.
With an effort, he managed to
And it
lower
goes
his
on the
voice.
floor. I'm not
He
going to be
could do
able to
nothing
use
about
it
the
anymore
intensity.
because
They were
my
supposed
dog
to be
Snoopy, he
protecting
sheds
her.
a lot, so
She's in the city,
it'd be
in the royal palace
half
with
dog fur
Colaver.
and
With Colaver.
half weed.
And they were supposed to be protecting her. Scratching his head, Gaul looked at Loyal. Is this wetlander humor? Faile Barra is out of short skirts. I know she's not a child. Theron drew a deep breath. It was very hard keeping a level tone with his belly full of acid. Loyal, will you explain to Gaul, that our women don't run around with spears? That Colaver wouldn't offer to fight Faile. She'd just order somebody to cut her throat, or throw her off a wall, or... The images were too much. He was going to empty his stomach in a moment. Loyal patted him awkwardly on the shoulder.
I know you're
Everything
worried.
feels a lot better.
I know
here
how I'd feel if
today.
I thought anything happened to
Because my
Karen.
old AC was gone.
The
It was
tufts on his
pretty
ears
much
quivered.
out, not
He
working.
was a fine one to talk.
And
He would run as
Most
hard as he
hated was
could
able
to
to
avoid his mother and the young
find
figure
one,
woman she had chosen for him.
on Marketplace
Oh, well,
that he picked up for me and
Karen,
pretty much paid
Faile
for it
is
and
waiting
whatnot.
for you safe and sound.
Installed
I
it and
know
all.
it. And you know she can care for herself. Why, she could care for herself and you and me and Gaul as well.
Not in the
His
best
booming
condition,
voice
but
sounded
neither
forced,
was my last
and
one.
it quickly faded to grave seriousness.
But hey,
Karen,
it could be
Karen,
look
you
Frankenstein
know
all
you
at once,
can't
as long
always
as
be
it
there
puts
to
out
protect
cold air.
Faile,
I don't
however
care
much
what
you
it looks
want
like.
to. But Viren, the pattern spun
It
you
looks
out
like
for
me.
a purpose,
It's been through the ringer.
and it will use you for that purpose.
Burn the pattern,
But hey,
Theron growled,
he's able to find it.
It
I was
can all
looking on it
burn.
earlier for one, and
if it keeps her safe.
I don't know how he's able to do
Loyal's
it.
ears went rigid with
finds
shock, and even Gaul looked taken aback. What does that make me? Theron thought.
Right, about the function.
He had been scornful of those who scribbled and scrabbled for their own ends, ignoring the last
I see
battle
one
and the
that
Dark One's
look
shadow creeping over
Like
the
they're
world.
brand new and don't work.
How was he different from them? And reined the black in beside him. Are you coming? I'm coming,
But
Theron
I
said
can't
bleakly.
complain one
He had
bit.
no answer for his own
'Cause I didn't
questions,
have the money
but
to
he knew
get
one
it.
thing.
Most hated did. He
Him.
bought it for me.
Aiel was the world.
He bought it for me and installed it
Tafur.
for me.
Into Kyrian. Theron would have set a harder pace than Rand did, though he knew the horses could not have stood it long. Half the time they rode at a trot, the other half ran alongside their animals.
But I'm able to have
Rand
the door
seemed
closed
unaware of
now,
anyone
which is
else, except that
very
he
good
always had a
plus.
hand for Min if she stumbled.
means I could sleep real good tonight.
For the rest, he was lost in some other
All
world,
thanks to
blinking in surprise
hated.
when he noticed Baron or Loyal. Truth to tell,
well, put him back there.
nobody was
'cause
any better.
His bruise back. in
Dilbrain's men and Javians stared straight
other
ahead,
part of
chewing
the
their own
house.
worries over what they would find. The Two Rivers men had soaked in Perrin's dark mood. They liked Faile. Truth be told, some worshipped her. And if she had been hurt in any way, even Aram's eagerness grew bleak once he realized that Faile might be in danger. Every man focused on the leagues before them, toward the city ahead. Except for the Ashaman, anyway. Close behind Rand, like a cluster of ravens, they studied the country the column crossed,
again,
still
it
wary of
wasn't
an
for,
ambush.
most
Deshiva
hated.
slumped in his
I
saddle
wouldn't
like
have
a
a lot of
sack
stuff.
and muttered darkly to himself when he had to run. He glared as if he hoped there was an ambush. Small chance of that. Suolin and a dozen Farderais Mai trotted ahead of the column in Perrin's sight, with as many more farther ahead, probing the way, and an equal number on the flanks. Some had thrust their short spears into the harnesses that held their bow cases on their backs, so the spearheads bobbed above their heads. The short horn bows were out, arrows knocked. They kept equally sharp watch for anything that might threaten the Ka Khan and on Rand himself, as though they suspected he might vanish again. If any trap waited, any danger approached, they would find it. Yad was one of the maidens with Suolin, a tall woman with dark reddish hair and gray eyes. Perrin stared at her back, willing her to drop behind the others and speak to him. Now and then she
Yeah,
spared him a
cheers,
glance,
Chris.
but she avoided him, as if he had 3 diseases, all catching. Bane was not with the column. Most of the maidens followed much the same route with Ruark and the Algaid Siswai, but moving more slowly because of the wagons and prisoners. Fail's black mare trotted behind Stepper, her reins tied to his saddle. The 2 Rivers men had brought Swallow from Cainlan when they joined him before Dumai's Wells. Every time he looked at the mare prancing along behind him, his wife's face swelled in his thoughts. Her bold nose and generous mouth, flashing dark eyes tilted above high cheekbones.
We need some rain over
She
here.
loved the animal, maybe almost as much as she did him. A woman as proud as she was beautiful, as fiery as she was proud. Davram Bashir's daughter would not hide or even hold her tongue, not for the likes of Kolabare. 4 times they stopped to rest the mounts, and he ground his teeth at the delay. Taking good care of horses was second nature to him. He checked Stepper absently, gave the stallion a little water by rote. Swallow he was more careful with. If Swallow reached Kyrian safely, a notion had planted itself in his mind. If he brought her mare to Kyrian, Fail would be all right. It was ludicrous, a boy's fancy, a small boy's foolish fancy, and it would not go away. Each of those stops, Min tried to reassure him. With a bantering grin, she said he looked like death on a winter morning, just waiting for somebody to shovel his grave full. She told him if he approached his wife with a face like that, Fail would slam the door on him. But she had to admit that none of her viewings promised that Fail was unharmed. Like Perrin, she said at last in exasperated tones, snugging her gray riding gloves. If anyone tries to harm the woman, she'll make him wait out in the hall till she has time for him. He very nearly growled at her. It was not that the 2 disliked each other exactly. Fail reminded Perrin that hunters for the Horn could take care of themselves, that Fail had survived Trollocs unscathed.
She is well, Perrin.
He boomed heartily, trotting beside Stepper with his long axe across his shoulders.
I know she is.
But he said the same 20 times, and each time he sounded a little less hearty. The Ogier's final attempt at heartening went further than Loyal intended.
I am sure Fail can look after herself, Perrin. She is not like Aerith. I can hardly wait for Aerith to make me her husband so I can tend her. I think I'd die if she changed her mind.
At the end of that, his mouth remained open, and his huge eyes popped. Ears fluttering, he stumbled over his own boots and nearly fell.
I never meant to say that,
he said hoarsely, striding along beside Perrin's horse once more. His ears still trembled.
I'm not sure I want to.
Yeah, where I live at, we're a desert climate,
Swallowing
so
hard, he gave Perrin an accusing look and spared one for Rand up ahead.
rain's good for us.
It is hardly safe to open your mouth with 2 Tabiran about. Anything at all might come out.
Nothing that might not have come off his tongue anyway, as he well knew. Though it might have happened 1 time in 1,000, or 1,000 times 1,000, without Taviran there. Loyal knew that also, and the fact of it seemed to frighten him as much as anything Perrin had ever seen. Some considerable time passed before the Ogier's ears stopped shaking. Fail filled Perrin's mind, but he was not blind, not completely. He at first saw without seeing, as they rode south and west, began to seep in at the edges. The weather had been hot when he headed north from Kyrian less than 2 weeks ago, yet it seemed the Dark One's touch had gained a harder hold, grinding the land more desperately than before. Brittle grass crackled beneath the horses' hooves, shriveled brown creepers spiderwebbed rocks on the hillsides, and naked branches, not merely leafless but dead, cracked when the arid wind gusted. Evergreen pine and leatherleaf stood brown and yellow, often as not. Farms had begun appearing after a few miles, plain structures of dark stone laid out in squares, the first in isolated clearings in the forest, then coming more thickly as the woodland thinned to trees hardly deserving the name. A cart road straggled there, running over the shoulders and crests of hills, accommodating stone-walled fields more than the terrain. Most of those early farms looked deserted. Here a ladder-back chair lying on its side in front of a farmhouse, there a rag doll by the roadside. Slat-ribbed cattle and lethargic sheep dotted pastures where frequently ravens squabbled over carcasses. Hardly a pasture but had a carcass or two. Streams ran in trickles down channels of dried mud. Cropland that should have been blanketed with snow looked ready to crumble to dust, where it was not dust already, blowing away. A tall plume of dust marked the passage of the column until the narrow dirt way joined the broad stone-paved road that led from Jengai Pass. Here there were people, though few, and those often lethargic, dull-eyed. The sinking sun almost halfway down to the horizon now, the air was an oven. The occasional ox cart or horse-drawn wagon hurried off the road, down narrow tracks or even into fields out of the way. The drivers, and a handful of farm folk in the open, stood blank-faced as they watched the three banners pass. Close to 1,000 armed men was reason enough to stare. 1,000 armed men heading somewhere in a hurry with a purpose. Reason enough to stare and be thankful when they passed out of sight. At last, when the sun had less than twice its own height yet to fall, the road topped a rise, and there 2 or 3 miles before them lay Kyrian. Rand drew rein, and the maidens, all together now, dropped to their heels where they were. They kept those sharp eyes out, though. Nothing could be seen moving on the nearly treeless hills around the city, a great mass of gray stone sinking toward the river Algueña on the west. Square-walled, square-towered, and stark. Ships of all sizes lay anchored in the river, some tied to the docks of the far bank, where the granaries were. A few vessels moved under sail or long sweeps. They gave an impression of peace and prosperity. With not a cloud in the sky, the light was sharp, and the huge banners flying from the city's towers stood plain enough to Perrin when the wind unfurled them. The scarlet banner of light and the white dragon banner with its serpentine creature scaled scarlet and gold. The wavy-rayed rising sun of Kyrian, gold on blue. And a fourth, given equal prominence with the rest. A silver diamond on a field checked yellow and red. Lowering a small looking-glass from his eye, a scowling Dobrain stuffed it into a worked leather tube tied to a saddle. I hope the savages had it wrong somehow. But if House Saigon flies with the rising sun, Kolover has the throne. She will be distributing gifts in the city every day. Coin, food, finery. It is traditional for the coronation festival. A ruler is never more popular than for the week after taking the throne. I ran sideways. The strain of speaking straight out hollowed his face. The commoners could riot if they disliked what you do. The streets would run with blood. Leon's gray gelding danced his rider's impatience, and the man himself kept looking from Rand to the city and back. It was not his city. He had made it clear earlier that he cared little what ran in the streets, so long as his own ruler was safe. For long moments Rand studied the city, or seemed to anyway. Whatever he saw, his face was bleak. Men studied him, worriedly, maybe pityingly. I will try to see they don't, he said at last. Flynn, remain here with the soldiers. Min, she broke in on him sharply. No, I am going where you go, Randolph Thor. You need me and you know it. The last sounded more plea than demand. But when a woman planted her fists on her hips that way and fixed her eyes to you, she was not begging.
I am going too,
Loyal added, leaning on his long hafted axe.
You always manage to do things when I'm somewhere else.
His voice took on a plaintive edge.
It won't do, Rand. It will not do for the book. How can I write about things if I am not there?
Still looking at Min, Rand half raised a hand toward her, then let it fall. She met his gaze levelly. This is madness. Holding his reins stiffly, Dashiva booted the plump mare closer to Rand's black. Reluctance twisted his features. Perhaps even Ashaman worried at being too near Rand. All it needs is one man with a bow or a knife, and you don't see him in time. Send one of the Ashaman to do what needs doing, or more, if you think it's necessary. A gateway to the palace. And it can be done before anyone knows what has happened. And sit here past dark, Rand cut in, reining his gelding around to face Dashiva. Until they know this place well enough to open one? That way brings bloodshed for sure. They've seen us from the walls, unless they're blind. Sooner or later they will send somebody to find out who we are and how many. The rest of the column remained hidden behind the rise. The banners were down there too. But men sitting their horses on a ridge with maidens for company would indeed attract curiosity. We'll do this my way. His voice rose in anger, and he smelled of cold fury. Nobody dies unless it can't be avoided, Dashiva. I've had a belly full of death. You understand me? Nobody. As my Lord Dragon commands. The fellow inclined his head, but he sounded sour, and he smelled. Baron rubbed his nose. The smell skittered, dodging wildly through fear and hate and anger and a dozen more emotions, almost too quickly to make out. He no longer doubted the man was mad, however good a face the fellow put on. Baron no longer really cared either. This close. Digging his heels into Stepper's flanks, he started for the city and Fail, not waiting for the rest, barely noticing Aram close behind. He did not have to see Aram to know he would be there. All he could think of was Fail. If he got Swallow safely into the city, he made himself keep Stepper at no more than a quick walk. A galloping rider drew eyes and questions and delays. At that pace, the others caught up with Aram fast enough. Those who were. Min had gotten her way, it seemed, and so had Loyal. The maidens fanned out ahead, giving Perrin sympathetic looks as they trotted by. Giad studied the ground until she was beyond him. Still don't like this plan, Avian muttered on one side of Rand. Forgive me, my Lord Dragon, but I do not. Dobrain, on Rand's other side, grunted. We have been over that, Mayana. If we did as you want, they would close the gates on us before we covered a mile. Avian growled something under his breath and danced his horse a few paces. He had wanted every man to follow Rand into the city. Perrin glanced over his shoulder, past the Ashaman. Damer Flynn, recognizable by his coat, and a few of the Two Rivers men were visible on the ridge, standing and holding their horses. Perrin sighed. He would not have minded having the Two Rivers men along, but Rand was probably right. Dobrain had backed him up. A few men could enter where a small army could not. If the gates were shut, the Aiel would have to besiege the city, if they still would, and then the killing began anew. Rand had stuffed the dragon scepter into one of the gelding's saddlebags, so just the carved butt stuck out, and that plain coat looked like nothing the dragon reborn would wear. For the Ashaman, nobody in the city had any idea what a black coat meant. Few men were easier to kill than a small army, too, even if most of them could channel. Baron had seen an Ashaman take a Shido spear through his belly, and the man had died no harder than any other. Dashiva grumbled under his breath. Baron caught hero and fool in equally disparaging tones. Without Fail, he might have agreed. Once Rand peered toward the Aiel encampment sprawled over the hills 2 or 3 miles east of the city, and Perrin held his breath. But whatever thoughts Rand had, he kept on the road. Nothing mattered more than Fail. Nothing, whether or not Rand saw it so. Good half-mile short of the gates, they rode into another camp, one that made Perrin frown. It was big enough for a city itself, a thick band of ramshackle brush huts and rickety tents made from scraps, on burned-over ground, clinging to the high gray walls as far as he could see. This had been called Foregate once, warren of twisting streets and alleys, before the Shido burned it. Some of the people stared in silence as the strange party passed, at an Ogier and Aiel maidens, but most scuttled about their business with wary, sullen faces and a care to notice nothing that was not right in front of them. The bright colors and often tattered cast-off finery worn by Foregaters mingled with the somber garb more usual for Carianan, the plain, dark clothes of villagers and farmers. Foregaters had been in the city when Perrin left, along with thousands of refugees from deeper inside the country. Most of those faces bore bruises, and worse, cuts and slashes, often unbandaged. Colliver must have put them out. They would not have left the shelter of the walls on their own. Foregaters and refugees alike feared the return of the Shido, the way a man who had been seared to the bone feared hot iron. The road ran straight through the camp to the Jangai gates, 3 tall square arches flanked by towers. Helmeted men lounged up on the battlements, peering down through the gaps in the stone teeth. Some stared off toward the men on the hilltop, and here and there an officer with a con held a looking glass to his eye. Rand's small party drew inquiring glances. Men a horseback and Aiel maidens, not common companions. Crossbows showed atop the serrated wall, but no one raised a weapon. The iron-bound gates stood open. Perrin held his breath. He wanted very much to gallop for the Sun Palace and Fail. Just inside the gates sat a squat stone guardhouse, where strangers to the city were supposed to register before entering. A square-faced Carianan officer watched them pass with a disgruntled frown, eyeing the maidens uneasily. He just stood there watching. "As I told you," Dobright said once they were by the guardhouse, "Colliver gave free access to the city for Coronation Festival. Not even someone under order of arrest can be denied or detained. It is tradition." It sounded relieved, though. Min sighed audibly, and Loyal let out a breath that could have been heard 2 streets over. Perrin's chest was still too tight for sighing. Swallow was inside Carian. Now, if he could only get her to the royal palace. Up close, Carian carried out what it had promised from afar. The highest of the hills lay inside the walls, but terraced, faced with stone, till they no longer seemed hills at all. Broad, crowded streets met at right angles. In this city, even the alleys made a grid. The streets rose and fell reluctantly with the hills, often simply cutting through. From shops to palaces, the buildings were all stark squares and severe rectangles. Even the great buttressed towers, each wrapped in scaffolding on a hilltop, the once fabled topless towers of Carian, still being rebuilt after burning in the Aiel War. The city seemed harder than stone, a bruising place, and shadows stretching across everything heightened the effect. Loyal's tufted ears twitched almost without stopping. A worried frown creased his forehead, and his dangling eyebrows brushed his cheek. There were few signs of Coronation Festival or High Chazeline. Perrin had no notion what the festival might entail, but in the 2 Rivers, the day of reflection was a time of merriment and forgetting the bleakness of winter. There, a near hush hung in the air, despite the number of people. Anywhere else, Perrin might have thought it the unnatural heat dragging people's spirits down, but except for Foregaters, Carianan were a sober, austere, on the surface at least. What lay underneath, he would as soon not think about. The hawkers and cart peddlers he remembered were gone from the streets, the musicians and tumblers and puppet shows. Those people would be in the ragtag camp outside the walls. A few closed, dark-painted sedan chairs threaded through the quiet throngs, some with house banners a little larger than cons standing stiffly above. They moved as slowly as the ox carts, with goad-wielding drivers walking alongside, axles squealing in the stillness. Outlanders stood out, no matter how little color they wore, because few except Outlanders rode. The almost inevitably shorter natives looked like pale-faced crows in their dark garb. Aiel stood out too, of course. Whether one alone or 10 together, they walked in clearings through the crowds. Eyes darted away and space just opened up around them wherever they went. Aiel faces turned toward the party as it made its slow way through the crowds. Even if not all recognized Rand in his green coat, they knew who a tall wetlander escorted by maidens must be. Those faces sent a chill down Perrin's spine. Considering. Made him thankful Rand had left all the Aes Sedai behind. Aside from the Aiel, the Dragon Reborn moved through a river of unconcern that parted for the maidens and closed in again behind the Ashaman. The royal palace of Carrion, the Sun Palace, the palace of the rising sun in splendor. Carrionin were great ones for names, each more extravagant than the last. Stood atop the highest hill in the city, a dark mass of square stone with stepped towers looming over everything. The street, the way of the crown, became a long, broad ramp rising toward the palace, and Perrin drew a deep breath as they came. Aiel was up there. Had to be, and safe. Whatever else, she had to be safe. He touched the knot holding Swallow's reins to a ring on his pommel, stroked the axe at his waist. The horses' shod hooves rang loudly on the paving stones. The maidens made no sound at all. The guards on the great open bronze gates watched their slow approach and exchanged glances. They were colorful for Carrionin soldiers, 10 men with the rising sun in gold on their dark breastplates, and scarves in House Saigon's colors, tied below the heads of their halberds. Perrin could have written out their thoughts. 13 men on horseback, but in no hurry, and only 2 wearing armor, 1 in Mayena red. Any trouble would come from Caroline Domitred or Toram Rioton, and Mayeners had no place in that. And there was a woman and an Ogier. Surely they intended no trouble. Still, 3 dozen or so maidens trotting ahead of the horses hardly looked as though they were coming for tea. For an instant, all hung balanced. Then a maiden bailed herself. The guards jerked as if goosed, and one slanted his halberd and darted to the gates. 2 steps he took, and stopped, rigid as a statue. Every guard stood stiff. Nothing moved but their heads. Good, Rand murmured. Now tie off the flows and leave them for later. Perrin shrugged uncomfortably. The Ashaman had spread out behind, taking up most of the width of the ramp. They must be using one power. Very likely, the 8 of them could tear the whole palace apart. Maybe Rand could have by himself. But if those towers began spewing crossbow bolts, they would die with everyone else, caught in the open on this ramp that no longer seemed so wide. But he sped up. Any eyes at the tall, narrow windows of the palace, on the colonnaded walks high above, must see nothing out of the ordinary. Suolin flashed maiden hand talk, and the one who had bailed lowered the black cloth hurriedly, face flushing. A slow walk up the stone ramp. Some of the guards' helmeted heads shook wildly, eyes rolling. One seemed to have fainted, slumping upright with his chin on his chest. Their mouths strained, open, but no sound came out. Perrin tried not to think about what had gagged them. A slow walk through the open bronze gates, into the main courtyard. There were no soldiers here. The stone balconies around the courtyard stood empty. Liveried servants rushed out with downcast eyes to take the horses' reins and hold stirrups. Stripes of red and yellow and silver ran down the sleeves of otherwise dark coats and dresses, and each had the rising sun small in the left breast. That was more color than Perrin had seen on the carrion and servant before. They could not see the guards outside, and likely would have done little different if they had. In Carrion, servants played their own version of Deus de Mar, the game of houses, but they pretended to ignore the doings of those above them. Taking too much notice of what happened among your betters, or at least being seen to take notice, might mean being caught up in it. In Carrion, maybe in most lands, ordinary folk could be crushed unnoticed where the mighty walked. Blocky Woman led Stepper and Swallow away without really looking at him. Swallow was inside the Sun Palace, and it made no difference. He still did not know whether Fail was alive or dead. A fool boy's fool fancy. Shifting his axe at his hip, he followed Rand up the broad gray stairs at the far end of the courtyard and nodded when Aram reached over his shoulder again to ease his sword. Liveried men swung open the great doors at the head of the stairs, bronze like the outer gates, and marked large with the rising sun of Carrion. Once, the entry hall would have stunned Perrin with its grandeur. Thick square columns of dark marble held a square vaulted ceiling 10 paces above floor tiles that alternated dark blue and deep gold. Gilded rising suns marched around the cornices, and friezes carved in the walls showed Carrion triumphs in battle. The hall was empty, save for a handful of young men clustered beneath one of the friezes who fell silent when Perrin and the rest entered. All men, he realized. All wore swords, but 4 of the 7 were women, in coats and snug breeches, much like men's, their hair cut short as the men's. Not that that was particularly short. Men and women alike had it gathered in a kind of tail that reached their shoulders, tied with a dark ribbon. One of the women wore green a little paler than normal for Carrion, and another bright blue. All the rest were in dark colors, with a few bright stripes across their chests. They studied Rand's party, with an especial view for himself, Perrin realized. His yellow eyes took people aback, although he hardly noticed it anymore unless somebody jumped or took motion. Studied in silence until the last of the Ashaman was in, and the doors swung shut. The boom of the closing covered a moment of fierce whispering. Then they came swaggering closer, the women strutting even more arrogantly than the men, which took some doing. Even the way they knelt was arrogant. The green-clad woman glanced at the one in blue, who had her head down, and said, "My Lord Dragon, I am Camille Nolason. Salanda Darangil leads our society." She blinked at a fierce look from the woman in blue. Despite the glare, Salanda smelled afraid to her bones, if Perrin was making out who was who properly. Clearing her throat, Camille went on. We did not expect you to return so soon." "Yes," Rand said softly. "I doubt anyone thought I would return so soon. None of you has any reason to be afraid of me. None at all. If you believe anything, believe that." Surprisingly, he looked right at Salanda when he said that. Her head whipped up, and as she stared at him, the fear smell faded. Not completely, but down to a tatter. Had Rand known it was there? "Where is Colaver?" Rand asked. Camille opened her mouth, but it was Salanda who answered. "In the grand hall of the sun." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the scent of her fear growing weaker. Oddly, a slight tinge of jealousy touched him once, just for an instant, when she glanced at men. Sometimes his sense of smell was more confusing than enlightening. "Is the 3rd sunset convocation," she went on. "We are not important enough to attend. Besides, I think we of the societies make her uneasy." "The 3rd, Dobrain muttered. "The 9th sunset after her coronation already. She wasted no time. At least they will all be together. No one of any rank or pretension will miss it, Carrion or Tyrant." Throwing herself up on her knees, Salanda managed to make it seem she was meeting Rand eye to eye. We are ready to dance the blades for you, my lord dragon. Sulin shook her head, wincing, and another maiden groaned audibly. Several looked and smelled ready to do some violence then and there. The Aiel could not decide what to make of these young wetlanders. The problem in Aiel eyes were that they were trying to be Aiel, in a way, to follow pt.2, their version of it anyway. These 7 were not the lot. Hundreds of the idiots at least could be found all over the city, organized into societies in imitation of the Aiel. Half the Aiel Perrin had heard mention them wanted to help, the other half wanted to strangle them. For himself, he did not care whether they mangled pt.2 to mincemeat. "Where is my wife?" he demanded. "Where is Fail?" The young fools exchanged guarded looks. Guarded? "He is in the Grand Hall of the Sun," Salanda said slowly. She is one of Queen of Coliver's lady attendants." "Put your eyes back in your head, Perrin," Min whispered. "She must have a good reason. You know she must." Shrugging inside his coat, Perrin tried to gather himself. One of Coliver's attendants? Whatever her reason, it must be good. That much he was sure of. But what could it be? Salanda and the others were passing those guarded looks about again. One of the men, a young fellow with a pointed nose, whispered fierce and low, "We swore not to tell anyone. Not anyone. On water oath." Before Perrin could demand to be told, Rand spoke. "Salanda, lead the way to the Grand Hall. There will be no blades. I am here to see justice done to all who deserve it." Something in his voice made Perrin's hackles rise. A hardness grim as a hammer's face. Fail did have a good reason. She had to. Chapter 5. A Broken Crown. Wide and tall as the corridors were, they felt close and dim, despite tall gilded stand lamps with mirrors on every branch, lit wherever daylight could not penetrate. Tapestries hung few and far between on the walls, scenes of hunt or battle with people and animals, arranged more precisely than ever nature had. Scattered niches held bowls and vases, and now and then a small statue, in gold or silver or alabaster, but even the statues seemed to emphasize that they were stone or metal, as if the sculptors had tried to banish curves. The city's hush was magnified here. The sound of their boots on the floor tiles echoed, a hollow, foreboding march. Perrin did not think it was so to his ears alone. Loyals quivered at every other step, and he peered down crossing corridors, as though wondering what might leap out. Min held herself stiffly and took ginger steps, grimacing ruefully when she glanced at Rand. She seemed to make an effort not to walk closer to him, and not particularly pleased with herself over it. The young Kyrianans started off swaggering like peacocks, but that arrogance faded as the drumming of their heels reverberated. Even the maidens felt it. Sulin was the only one whose hand did not sometimes rise toward the veil hanging down her chest. There were servants everywhere, of course, pale, narrow-faced men and women in dark coats and dresses with the rising sun on the left breast, and sleeves striped in Coliver's colors. Some gaped in recognition as Rand passed by. A handful dropped to their knees, heads bowed. Most went on about their tasks after a small pause for a deep bow or curtsy. It was just as in the courtyard. Show proper respect to your betters, whoever they are. Obey them and otherwise ignore what they do, and perhaps you will not be entangled in it. It was a way of thinking that set Perrin's teeth on edge. Nobody should have to live that way. Fellows in Coliver's livery, standing before the gilt-covered doors to the Grand Hall of the Sun, frowned at the sight of the maidens, and maybe at the young Kyrianan. Older folk usually looked askance at the young ones carrying on every bit as much as the Aiel did. More than one parent had tried to put an end to it, had ordered sons or daughters to give over, except the helmsman and servants to chase off other like-minded sons and daughters, like common vagrants or street ruffians. Baron would not have been surprised to stop Solanda and her friends from entering, ability or not, and perhaps even the maidens. Few Carianan still dared call Aiel savages, not where they could be heard, but most thought it. The pair gathered themselves, drew deep breaths, and saw Rand over the maidens' heads. Their eyes nearly popped out of their faces. Each man glanced sideways at the other, then they were on their knees. One stared fixedly at the floor, the other squeezed his eyes shut, and Perrin heard him praying under his breath. "Oh, I am loved," Rand said softly. He hardly sounded himself. Min touched his arm, her face pained. Rand patted her hand without looking at her. For some reason, that seemed to pain her even more. Grand Hall of the Sun was immense, with an angle-vaulted ceiling a full 50 paces high at its peak. Great golden lamps hung on gilded chains, thick enough to move the gates of a fortress. It was immense, and it was full, people crowding among massive square columns of blue-black veined marble that stood in 2 rows to either side of the center aisle. The folk at the rear noticed the newcomers first. In long coats and short, some in bright colors or embroidered, some travel-worn, they stared curiously, intently. The few women in the back of the hall wore riding dresses, had faces as hard as the men, gazes as direct. Hunters for the horn, Perrin thought. Dobrain had said that every noble who could be there would. Most hunters were nobly born, or claimed to be. Whether or not they recognized Rand, they sensed something, hands feeling for swords and daggers that were not there this evening. More hunters than not sought adventure and a place in the histories along with the Horn of Valier. Even if they did not know the Dragon Reborn, they knew danger when they saw it. The others in the Grand Hall were less attuned to danger, or rather, more to intrigues and plots than to open hazard. Perrin was a third of the way down the long center aisle, close on Rand's heels, before gasps ran through the chamber like a wind. Pale Carianan lords with colorful slashes across the chests of their dark silk coats, some with the front of their heads shaved and powdered. Carianan ladies with stripes on their dark high-necked gowns and lace balls covering their hands, their hair in intricate towers that often added a good foot of height. Tyrant high lords and lords of the land with oiled beards trimmed to points, velvet hats and coats of red and blue and every color.
Oh shit! Hey,
Puffy,
James Money.
satin
Sorry I
striped
missed you.
sleeves.
I got
Tyrant
distracted
ladies
with what's on
in even more colorful
my
gowns,
tablet.
with wide lace ruffs
Sorry
and
about
close
that.
caps studded with pearls and moonstones, fire drops and rubies. They knew Perrin, and they knew Dobrain, and even Javian and Min. But most importantly, they knew Rand. A ripple of knowing that kept pace up the hall with him. Eyes widening, jaws dropping, they went so stiff Perrin almost thought the Ashaman had bound them like the guards outside the palace. The chamber was a sea of sweet perfumes, and beneath that, undercurrents of salty sweat. But through it oozed fear, a quivering sort of smell. The tension was all on the far end of the hall, though, on the deep blue marble dais where the sun throne stood, shining like its namesake with gilt, the wavy-rayed rising sun huge atop the high back. Coliver rose slowly, peering down the aisle over Rand's head. Her nearly black dress bore not a single stripe of nobility. The great mass of curls rising above her head had to have been dressed around the crown she wore, the rising sun in gold and yellow diamonds. 7 young women flanked the sun throne in dark bodiced gowns with lace snugged under their chins, and skirts striped vertically in Coliver's yellow and red and silver. It seemed that Carianan fashion was different for the queen and for the queen's attendants. A flicker of motion behind the throne picked out an 8th woman, hidden, but Perrin cared about neither Coliver nor anyone else except the woman to her ultimate right. Feel. Her slightly tilted eyes fastened on him, dark liquid moons, yet not a line altered of her coolly decorous expression. If anything, her face grew tighter. His nose strained for the scent of her, but the perfume was too strong, and the fear. She had a reason for being there on the dais, a good reason. She did. And touched Sulan's sleeve. Wait here, he said. Scowling, the scar on her leathery face standing out as white as her hair, she scanned his face with obvious reluctance. Her free hand gestured anyway, and another gasp ran through the chamber as the maidens veiled. It was almost laughable. The 8 men in black coats trying to watch everywhere at once could probably kill them all before the first maiden drove home a spear, but no one knew who or what they were. No one looked at them twice, a handful of men with their swords sheathed, only at the maidens, and ran. Hadn't they noticed that not a one of those men sweated a drop more than ran? Aaron felt as if he were bathing in his. Stepping past the maidens, with men still close beside him, Rand stopped as first Perrin, then Dobrain and Javier joined him. And Aram, of course, like Perrin's shadow. Rand studied them each in turn, nodding slowly. He studied Perrin longest, and took the longest time to nod. The gray-haired Karianen and the young Mayener wore faces like death. Perrin did not know how his own looked, but his jaw was locked tight. No one was going to harm Fail, no matter what she had done, no matter why, no matter what he had to do to stop it. Boots drummed loud in the silence as they crossed the huge golden mosaic of the rising sun and the blue tiled floor and approached the throne. Hands gripping her skirts, Colabert wet her lips, and her eyes darted between Rand and the doors behind him. Looking for Aes Sedai? Rand's voice echoed. He smiled unpleasantly. I sent them to the Aiel camp. If the Aiel can't teach them manners, no one can. A shocked murmur rose and fell raggedly. Fear became stronger than the perfumes in Perrin's nose. Oliver gave a start. Why would I? Drawing a deep breath, she gathered dignity. A more than handsome woman in her middle years, without a touch of gray in her dark hair, she bore a regal presence that had nothing to do with the crowd. She had been born to command, to reign, so she thought. And her eyes, weighing and measuring, betrayed a hard intelligence. My Lord Dragon, she said, making a curtsy so deep it nearly mocked itself. I welcome you back. Tarian welcomes you back. The way she said it, she seemed to be repeating. Slowly, Rand climbed the steps of the dais. Min half made to follow him, then folded her arms. Perrin did follow, to be near Fail, but only part way. It was her gaze that stopped him. The gaze that probed every bit as much as Colabert's. At him, as much as at Rand. Perrin wished he could smell her. Not to try discovering why or what, just for the smell of her. Wash of perfumes and fright was too great. Why did she not speak? Why did she not jump at him or smile? Just a smile. Colabert stiffened a splinter's worth, but only that. Her head came no more than level with Rand's chest, though her towered hair rose almost as tall as he. His eyes slid from her face and along the women lined up on either side of the throne. He might have paused on Fail. Perrin could not be sure. Rand rested his hand on one heavy arm of the sun throne. You know I mean this for Elaine Tracan. His voice was emotionless. Lord Dragon, Colabert replied smoothly. Carian had been too long without a ruler. A Carianan ruler. You yourself said you have no interest in the Sun Throne for yourself. Elaine Tracan would have had some claim, a small, quick gesture dismissed such a claim. If she were alive. Rumor says she is dead, like her mother. A dangerous thing to say. A good many rumors said Rand had killed both mother and daughter. The woman was no coward. Blaine is alive. The words were still flat as a plain board, but Rand's eyes burned. Heron could not pick out his smell any more than Fail's, but he did not need his nose to know rage bottled right in front of him. She will have the crowns of Andor and of Kyrian. Lord Dragon, what is done cannot be undone. If anything has offended you, for all her dignity, all her courage, Gulliver made a visible effort not to flinch as Rand reached out and took hold of the sun crown. There was a loud crack of metal snapping, and the crown flexed, partly disarraying how it curled as it pulled away, slowly straightening. A few of the brilliant yellow stones popped from their settings and fell. Held up the stretched arc of metal, slowly it bent back on itself until the ends met.
That was a rough one. That was a catch ball.
Could see what happened, could understand, but the Baron. One moment the crown was broken, the next it was whole again. No one among the nobles made a sound, not even a shuffling of boots. Baron thought they might be afraid too. To his nose, stark terror was stronger than any other scent now. It did not quiver, it spasmed wildly. Never can be done, Rand said softly. Can be undone. Gulliver's face drained of blood. The few wisps of hair that had escaped her coiffure made her seem wild, at bay. Swallowing, she opened her mouth twice before the words came out. My Lord Dragon. It was a breathy whisper, but as she went on, her voice became stronger and edged with desperation. She seemed to forget anyone else was present. I have kept the laws you made, maintained your policies, even those that go against the ancient laws of Kyrian, against all custom. She probably meant the laws that had let a noble kill a farmer or craftsman and walk away. Lord Dragon, the Sun Throne is yours to give. I know that. I was wrong to take it without your leave. But I have the right to it, by birth and blood. If I must have it from your hand, then give it to me by your hand. I have the right. And only looked at her. He said nothing. He seemed to be listening, but not to her. Aaron cleared his throat. Why was Rand dragging this out? It was done, nearly. Let whatever else had to be done be done. Then he could take Fail away, or they could talk. Did you have the right to murder Lord Marengil and High Lord Mylan? Aaron demanded. There was no doubt in his mind that she had had it done. They had been her biggest rivals for the throne. Or she and they thought they were anyway. Why was Rand just standing there? He knew all of this. Where is Barrelane? Before the name was off his tongue, he wanted to call it back. Fail only glanced at him, her face still a cool mask of propriety. That glance could have set water aflame. A jealous wife is like a hornet's nest in your mattress, the saying went. No matter how you twitched, you got stung. Who dare accuse me of so vile a crime? Gulliver demanded. There is no proof. There can be no proof. Not when I am innocent. Abruptly, she seemed to become aware of where she was, of the nobles crowded shoulder to shoulder among the columns, watching and listening. Whatever else could be said of her, she did have courage. Standing straight, she did her best to stare Rand in the eye without tilting her head too far back. My Lord Dragon, 9 days ago at sunrise, I was crowned Queen of Kyrian according to the laws and usages of Kyrian. I will keep my oath of fealty to you, but I am Queen of Kyrian. Rand only stared at her, silent. And troubled, Perrin would have said. My Lord Dragon, I am Queen, unless you would rip all our laws away. Still silence from Rand, and an unblinking stare. Why doesn't he end it, Perrin wondered. These charges against me are false. They are mad. Only that silent stare for answer. Oliver moved her head uneasily. Anura, advise me. Come, Anura, advise me. Perrin thought she spoke to one of the women with Fail, but the woman who stepped from behind the throne did not wear the striped skirts of an attendant. A broad face with a wide mouth and a beak of a nose regarded Rand from beneath dozens of long, thin, dark braids. An ageless face. To Perrin's surprise, Javian made a sound in his throat and began grinning. His own hackles were standing straight. I cannot do this, Colliver, the Aes Sedai said in a Tarabana accent, shifting her gray-fringed shawl. I fear I have allowed you to misperceive my relationship to you. Drawing a deep breath, she added, There is no need for this, Master Althor. Her voice became slightly unsteady for a moment. Or, my Lord Dragon, if you prefer. I assure you, I harbor no ill intentions toward you. If I did, I would have struck before you knew I was here. Might well have died if you had. Rand's voice was icy steel. His face made it seem soft. I'm not who has shielded you, Aes Sedai. Who are you? Why are you here? Answer me! I don't have much patience with your kind. Unless you want to be hauled out to the Aiel camp, I wager the wise ones can make you speak freely. This Anura was not slow-witted. Her eyes darted to Aram, then to the aisle where the Ashaman stood. And she knew. They had to be who he meant in their black coats, grim faces dry when every other but hers and Rand's glistened. Young Jahar was watching her like a hawk watching a rabbit. Incongruously, Loyal stood in the midst of them with his axe propped against his shoulder. One big hand managed to hold an ink bottle and an open book, pressed awkwardly against his chest, while the other scribbled as fast as he could dip a pen fatter than Perrin's thumb. He was taking notes. Here. Nobles heard Rand as well as Anura did. They had been watching the veiled maidens uneasily. Now they crowded back from the Ashaman, pressing together like fish in a barrel. Here and there someone sagged in a faint, held up by the throng. Shivering, Anura adjusted her shawl and regained all the vaunted Aes Sedai composure. I am Anura Larison, my Lord Dragon, of the Grey Abja. Nothing about her said that she was shielded, and in the presence of men who could channel, she seemed to answer as a favor. I am the advisor to Berelain, first of Mayenne. So that was why Javian was grinning like a madman. He had recognized the woman. Perrin did not feel like grinning at all. This has been kept secret, you understand, she went on, because of the attitude of Tyr, both toward Mayenne and toward Aes Sedai. But I think me the time for secrets, it is past, yes? Anura turned full of air, and her mouth burned. I let you think what you would think. But Aes Sedai do not become advisors simply because someone tells them they are. Most especially when they already advise someone else. If Berelain confirms your story, Rand said, I will parole you to her custody. Looking at the crown, he seemed to realize for the first time that the spray of gold and gems was still in his hand. Very gently, he set it on the silk-covered seat of the Sun Throne. I don't think every Aes Sedai is my enemy. Not entirely. But I won't be schemed against, and I won't be manipulated. Not anymore. It's your choice, Anora. But if you make the wrong one, you will go to the wise ones. If you live long enough. I won't hobble the Asherman, and a mistake could cost you. The Asherman, Honora said calmly. I quite understand. She touched her lips with her tongue. My lord dragon, Colabert plotted to break her oath of fealty. Baron had wished so hard for Fail to speak that he jumped when she did, stepping out of the line of attendants. Choosing her words carefully, she confronted the would-be queen like a stooping eagle. Liked that she was beautiful. Colabert swore to obey you in all things and uphold your laws, but she has made plans to rid Carrion of the Aiel, to send them south and return all to as it was before you came. She also said that if you ever returned, you would not dare change anything she had done. The woman she told these things, Mare, was one of her attendants.
Come on, then, stupid.
Mare vanished soon after telling me. I have no proof, but I believe she is dead. I believe Colabert regretted revealing too much of her mind, too soon. O'Brien strode up the steps to the dais, his helmet under his arm. His face might have been cold iron. Colabert Sargon, he announced in a formal voice that carried to every corner of the grand hall. By my immortal soul under the light, I, Dobrain, high seat of House Taborwin, do arraign and censure you of treason,
He didn't
the
want to
penalty
go
for which
outside.
is death.
He was just being a pain.
And
Maybe
stepped
I'm being
back,
pushy
eyes
because he
closed.
wants to go to bed
His
already.
mouth moved slightly, but Baron knew that only he and Rand heard what was said. No, I cannot. I will not.
It's Ozzy.
Baron understood the delay now.
I was going to put both
Rand
of them
was
out,
searching
but
for a way out.
Snoopy didn't
Baron
want
wished
to
he
go
could
out.
see one.
He was just being pushy.
Colabert certainly did not hear, but she wanted a way out too. She looked around wildly, to the sun throne, to her other attendants, to the assembled nobility, as though they might step forward to defend her. Their feet could as well have been set in cement. A sea of carefully blank, sweaty faces confronted her, and eyes that avoided hers. Some of those eyes rolled toward the Ashaman, but not too openly. The already considerable space between nobles and Ashaman widened noticeably. Lies, she hissed, hands knotted in her skirts. All lies, you sneaking little... She took a step toward Fail. Rand stretched his arm between them, though Colabert appeared not to see it, and Fail looked as though she wished he had not. Anyone who attacked her was in for a surprise. Fail does not lie, Aaron growled.
Right.
Well, not about something like
He went and
this.
laid, curled right back up.
Once again, Colabert recovered herself. Slight as her height was, she drew up
Right
every
next to
inch of it.
Snoopy.
Aaron almost admired her.
Snoopy didn't want to go outside.
Except for Mylan and Mara
He was
Gill
just
and
being,
Despair. And the light alone knew how many
a
others.
little pushy because he wants
I demand
the light
justice,
to go
my
off.
Lord Dragon.
Me to lay
Her
down and go
voice
to
was
bed
calm,
already.
stately, royal. There is no proof of any of this,
But it wasn't this type of
this
light.
filth.
He'd
The
be
claim that
bugging even
someone
more.
who is no longer
It'd
in
be too
Kyrian
bright
says
for him.
I spoke words I never did.
At least for him to fall asleep.
Demand the Lord Dragon's justice. By your own laws, there must be proof. How do you know she is no longer in Kyrian? Dobrain demanded. Where is she? I assume she is gone. She addressed her answer to Rand. Mare left my service, and I replaced her with Rila there. She gestured toward the third attendant on the left. I have no idea where she is. Bring her forward if she is in the city, and let her make these ridiculous charges to my face. I will fling her lies in her face. Fail looked murder at her. Aaron hoped she would not produce one of those knives she kept hidden about her. She had a habit of doing that when she became angry enough. Honora cleared her throat. She had been studying Rand much too closely for Perrin's comfort.
Now he's trying to get
Reminded
just the
him
right
of
spot
Baron
before
suddenly. That look of a
Snoopy
bird
got him
examining
up.
a worm. May I speak, Master... My Lord Dragon? At his curt nod, she went on, adjusting her shawl. Of young Mare, I know nothing except that one morning she was here, and before nightfall she was nowhere to be found, and none knew where she had gone. Lord Moringill and High Lord Mylan, they are a different matter. The first of Mayenne, she brought with her two most excellent thief-catchers, men experienced in ferreting out crimes. They have brought before me two of the men who waylaid the High Lord Mylan in the streets, though both insist they only held his arms while others did the stabbing. Also, they brought me the servant who put poison in the spiced wine Lord Moringill liked to drink at bedtime. She also protests her true innocence. Her invalid mother would have died, and she herself had Lord Moringill not. So she says, and in her case, I believe she speaks truly. Her Solicet confession was not false, I think. Both the men and the woman agree in this. The orders for their actions came from the mouth of Lady Colivert herself. And by word, the defiance leached out of Colivert. She still stood, yet it seemed to wonder. She appeared as limp as a damp rag. They promised, she mumbled to Rand. They promised you would never return. Too late, she clamped both her hands over her mouth. Her eyes bulged. Aaron wished he could not hear the words coming from her throat. No one should make sounds like that. Treason and murder, Dobrain sounded satisfied. Those whimpered screams did not touch him. Penalty is the same, my Lord Dragon. Death. Except by your new law, it is hanging for murder. For some reason, Rand looked at Min. She returned his gaze with profound sadness. Not for Colivert, for Rand. Baron wondered whether a viewing was involved. I demand the headsman, Colivert managed in a strangled voice. Her face sagged. She had become old on the spot, and her eyes were mirrors of stark terror. With nothing left, she fought on for the scraps. It is my right. I will not be hanged like some commoner. And seemed to struggle with himself, shaking his head in that disturbing way. When he spoke at last, his words were winter cold and anvil hard. Colivert Saigon, I strip you of your titles. He drove the words like nails.
Thanks, Christopher.
I strip you of your lands and estates and possessions.
Huh?
Of everything but the dress you stand in. Did you own a farm? A small farm? Each sentence staggered the woman. She swayed drunkenly on her feet, soundlessly mouthing the word farm as if she had never heard it before. Anura, Fail, everyone stared at Rand in amazement or curiosity or both. Baron not least. A farm?
Yeah, fine. I got sound
in the
lucky.
Grand Hall before. Now it
He
seemed
was
that no one
definitely
even
a
breathed.
good pick.
O'Brien, did she own a small farm?
I know.
She owns
He's being pushy now, too.
many farms, my Lord Dragon, the Carrigan replied slowly. Clearly, he understood no more than Perrin did. Most are large, but the lands near the Dragon Wall have always been divided into small holdings, less than 50 hides. All of the tenants abandoned them during the Aiel War. Rand nodded. Time to change that. Too much land has lain fallow too long. I want to move people back there to farm again. O'Brien, you will find out which farm of those Colivert owned near the Dragon Wall is the smallest. Colivert, I exile you to that farm. Dobrain will see you're provided with what is needed to make a farm work, and with someone to teach you how to till the soil, and with guards to see that you never go farther from it, and you can walk in a day so long as you live. See to it, Dobrain. A week, I want her on her way. A bewildered Dobrain hesitated before nodding. Aaron could catch murmurs from the assembly behind him now. This was unheard of. None understood why she was not to die. And the rest? Their estates had been confiscated before, but never all. Never nobility itself. Nobles had been exiled, even for life, but never to a farm. Bolivar's response was immediate. Eyes rolling up in her head, she collapsed, crumpling backward toward the steps. Aaron darted to catch her, but someone was ahead of him. Before he had taken a full step, her fall simply stopped. She slumped in midair, slanting over the steps to the dais, head dangling. Slowly, her unconscious form rose, swung around, and settled gently in front of the sun throne.
Won't be much longer.
Aaron was sure the Ashaman would have let her fall. Nora tisked. She did not appear surprised or perturbed, except that her thumbs rubbed her forefingers nervously. I suspect she would have preferred the headsman. I will see to her if you have your man, your Ashaman. She's not your concern, Rand said roughly. She is alive, and she is alive. He drew a long, ragged breath. Min was there before he let it out. She only stood near him, yet she looked as if she wanted to do something more. Slowly, his face firmed. Nora, you will take me to Berlin. Release her, Jahar. She'll be no trouble. Not with one of her and 9 of us. I want to find out what has been going on while I was away, Nora, and what Berlin means bringing you here behind my back. No, don't speak. I'll hear it from her. Aaron, I know you want some time with Fail. Rand's gaze swept slowly around the hall, over all the nobles waiting silently. Under his stare, none dared move a muscle. The scent of fear far outweighed any other, convulsing sharply.
Be right back, everyone.
Except for the hunters, everyone there had given him the same oath as had Kolover. Perhaps just being in this gathering was treason too? Aaron did not know. This audience is at an end, Rand said. I will forget every face that departs now. Those at the front, the highest ranking, the most powerful, began their progress toward the doors without too much haste, avoiding the maidens and the Ashaman standing in the aisle, while the rest waited their turn. Every mind must have been turning over what Rand had said, though. What precisely did he mean by now? Purposeful strides quickened, skirts were lifted. Hunters, nearest the doors, began slipping out, first one at a time, then in a flood. And seeing them, lesser nobles among the Carianan and Tyrants departed ahead of the higher. In moments, it was a milling mass at the doors, men and women pushing and elbowing to get out. Not one looked back at the woman stretched out before the throne she had held so briefly. Chapter 6. Old fear and new fear. Rand passed through the struggling mob without any difficulty, of course. Maybe it was the presence of the maidens and the Ashaman, or maybe Rand or one of the black-coated fellows did something with the power, but the crowd parted for him, with Min holding to his arm, the very subdued Anura attempting to speak to him, and Loyal, who was still trying with some difficulty to write in his book, and carry his axe. Staring at one another, Aaron and Fail missed their chance to join them before the crowd closed up again. She said nothing for a time, and neither did he. Not what he wanted to say. Not with Aram there, staring at them like some worshipful hound. And Dobrain, frowning down at the unconscious woman put in his charge. No one else remained on the dais. Avian had gone with Rand to find Berlane. As soon as Rand went, The other attendants had darted away toward the doors without a second glance at Baron or Fail, or Colabert. Without the first glance, for that matter. They just lifted their striped skirts and ran. Grunts and curses drifted from the pack, not all in men's voices. Even with Rand gone, those people wanted to be elsewhere, and now. Perhaps they thought Perrin stayed to watch and report. Though had any glanced back, they would have seen his eyes were not on them. Coming the rest of the way, he took Fail's hand and breathed in the scent of her. This close, the lingering perfumes did not matter. Anything else could wait. She produced a red lace fan from somewhere, and before spreading it to cool herself, touched first her cheek, then his. There was a whole language of fans in her native Saldaia. She had taught him a little. He wished he knew what the cheek-touching meant. It must be something good. On the other hand, her scent carried a spiky shading he knew too well. Should have sent her to the block, Dobrain muttered, and Perrin shrugged uncomfortably. From the man's tone, it was not clear whether he meant that that was what the law called for, or that it would have been more merciful. Dobrain did not understand. Rand could have sprouted wings first. Fail's fan slowed to barely moving, and she eyed Dobrain sideways over the crimson lace. Death might be best for everyone. That is the prescribed penalty. What will you do, Lord Dobrain? Sidelong or not, it still managed to be very direct, a very meaningful gaze. Perrin frowned. A word for him, a question for Dobrain. And there was that undertone of jealousy in her aroma, making him sigh. The Carianan gave her a level look in a return, while thrusting his gauntlets behind his sword belt. What I was commanded to do. I keep my oaths, Lady Fail. Fan snapped open and shut, faster than thought. He actually sent Aes Sedai to the Aiel? As prisoners? Disbelief tinged her voice. Some, Lady Fail. Dobrain hesitated. Some swore fealty on their knees. This I saw with my own eyes. They went to the Aiel too, but I do not think they can be called prisoners. I saw it too, my lady, Aram put in from his place on the steps, and a wide smile split his face when she glanced at him. Red lace described a fluttering hitch. What she did with the fan seemed almost unconscious. Who broke so? The relief in her voice and in her scent was so strong that Perrin stared. What did you think, Fail? Would Rand lie, especially when everyone would know in a day? Instead of answering immediately, she frowned down at Colabert. Is she still under? Not that it matters, I suppose. She knows more than I would say here. Everything we worked so hard to keep hidden. She let that slip to Mare, too. She knows too much. Brain thumbed one of Colabert's eyes open none too gently. As if hit with a mace. A pity she did not break her neck on the steps. But she will go to her exile and learn to live as a farmer. A brief, jaggedy, vexed smell wafted from Fail. Abruptly it hit Perrin what his wife had been proposing so obliquely, but Dobrain had rejected just as indirectly. Every hair on his body tried to stand. From the start he had known that he had married a very dangerous woman. Just not how dangerous.
Very stupid.
Aram was peering at
Go to your
Colabert,
side.
his lips pursed in dark thought. The man would do anything for Fail.
Your side now.
Don't think Rand would like it if anything prevented her reaching that farm, Perrin said firmly, eyeing Aram and Fail in turn. I wouldn't like it either. He felt rather proud of himself. That was talking around the point as well as any of them.
Go your side.
Aram bowed his head briefly.
Stupid.
He
Your side.
understood, but Fail tried
Go.
to look innocent above her gently fluttering fan, with no notion what he was talking about. Suddenly he realized not all the fear scent came
Soupy.
from the people
I
still
mean,
milling the
Ozzy, leave
door.
him alone.
A thin, quivering thread of it
Ozzy.
wafted from her. Fear under
He's
control.
being a pain in the butt
Yet
to
it was
Snoopy
there.
right now, not letting him sleep.
What's the
Ozzy.
matter, Fayul? Light, you'd think Corin and that lot had won instead of... Her face did not change, but the thread grew thicker. Is that why you didn't say anything
He
at
finally
first?
curled up a
He
little
asked
bit.
softly. Were you afraid we had come back as puppets? Them pulling the strings. He eyed the rapidly diminishing crowd across the grand hall. The nearest of them was alone.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all have a good night, and y'all stay safe out there.